When billionaire CEO Sophia Lane's motorcycle breaks down in a forgotten desert town, she discovers that the grease-stained mechanic who helps her might be worth more than her entire empire. But when her true identity is exposed, their unlikely love story becomes a battle between two worlds, one built on wealth and power, the other on authenticity and heart. Welcome to a story that will take you from the dusty streets of small-town America to the glittering boardrooms of corporate giants. Stay with me until the end to see how love can bridge the impossible, and don't forget to comment which city you're watching from, so I can see how far this tale of true connection has traveled across the world. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt of Carter's Automotive, where Ethan Carter stood beneath the hood of a rusted pickup truck, his calloused hands working with the precision of a surgeon and the desperation of a man running out of time. The foreclosure notice, now 3 days old, lay crumpled in his back pocket, like a death sentence written in legal jargon and corporate letterhead. "Damn carburetor," he muttered, his voice echoing in the cavernous garage that had been his father's legacy and was now becoming his failure. The wrench slipped in his oil-slicked grip, and he cursed again, this time with the fervor of a man who had been cursing the same problems for 6 months straight. Copper Creek, Arizona. Population 847 and declining, wasn't the kind of place where dreams came true. It was the kind of place where dreams came to die slowly and quietly, like old engines left to rust in the desert sun. Once a thriving stop along Route 66, the town had been bypassed by progress left to survive on the stubborn determination of its residents and the occasional lost tourist who took a wrong turn off the interstate. Ethan wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of grease that made him look like a warrior marked for battle. At 32, he had the hands of a man twice his age and the dreams of someone half his years. His father, Big Jim Carter, had built this garage from nothing in 1987, back when Copper Creek still had hope and Highway 40 still brought steady business. Now 3 years after a heart attack had claimed Big Jim and left Ethan to carry on alone, the garage was bleeding money faster than a punctured oil pan. "Morning, Ethan," called out Mrs. Henderson from across the street, her voice carrying the forced cheerfulness that had become the town's default tone. She was opening up Henderson's General Store, one of only 3 businesses still operating on Main Street. "How's that truck coming along?" "Just fine, Mrs. H," Ethan called back, though they both knew it was a lie. The truck belonged to Miguel Santos, who ran the town's only remaining farm. Miguel hadn't paid for the last 3 repairs, not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. Half the town was in the same boat, floating on credit and prayers while the water rose around them. Ethan had learned early that being a small-town mechanic meant more than fixing engines. It meant being a confessor, a counselor, and sometimes a last line of defense against complete despair. When Sarah Miller's car broke down last month, Ethan had fixed it for free because he knew she was choosing between car repairs and her daughter's medicine. When old Pete Morrison's ancient Ford finally gave up the ghost, Ethan had spent his own money on parts, because Pete had been his father's best friend, and some debts couldn't be measured in dollars. The problem was the bank didn't accept good intentions as collateral. Copper Creek First National, now owned by some faceless corporation in Phoenix, wanted their money. They wanted it in full, and they wanted it by the end of the month. $14,637. Ethan had counted it so many times the numbers had burned themselves into his memory like a brand. He'd tried everything. He'd called every contact his father had made in 40 years of business. He'd applied for loans from 3 different banks and been rejected by all of them. He'd even swallowed his pride and asked his Uncle Robert in Flagstaff for help, only to be told that family was family, but business was business, and Robert couldn't risk his own retirement on a failing garage in a dying town. The sound of a motorcycle approaching broke through Ethan's dark thoughts. He looked up from the engine bay to see a figure in black leather riding what appeared to be a custom-built machine, all curves and chrome and barely contained power. The bike was beautiful, the kind of motorcycle that cost more than most people in Copper Creek made in a year. But as it drew closer, Ethan could hear the telltale signs of trouble. A sputter in the engine, an irregularity in the rhythm that spoke of mechanical distress. The motorcycle pulled into the garage's lot, with the last gasps of a dying engine, its rider skillfully guiding it to a stop near the office door. The rider was tall and lean, dressed in black leather that had seen some miles, but still maintained an expensive sheen. A helmet obscured the face, but there was something graceful about the way the figure dismounted, something that spoke of confidence and control even in the face of mechanical failure. "Trouble," Ethan called out, wiping his hands on a rag that had long ago given up any pretense of cleanliness. The rider removed the helmet and Ethan felt his breath catch. She was beautiful in a way that seemed almost alien in Copper Creek. Sharp cheekbones and intelligent eyes, skin that spoke of expensive skin care, and a life lived mostly indoors, hair that caught the desert sunlight like spun gold. But there was something else, something that made Ethan look twice. Despite the designer leather and the custom motorcycle, she looked tired. Not physically tired, but soul-deep weary, the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying burdens that money couldn't lift. "More than trouble," she said, her voice carrying an accent that wasn't quite local, but wasn't quite anywhere else either. "I think she's finally given up on me." She gestured to the motorcycle with genuine affection, the way someone might indicate a beloved but stubborn pet. "I've been nursing her along for the last 50 miles, but I think we're done negotiating." Ethan approached the bike, his practiced eye already cataloging potential problems. "What's her story?" "Custom build, mostly Harley parts, but with some modifications." She paused as if weighing how much to reveal. "I bought her from a builder in Los Angeles. She's been perfectly reliable until today." Ethan knelt beside the motorcycle, running his hands along the engine casing, with the reverence of a man who understood that every machine had a soul. "Mind if I take a look? Please," she said, and there was something in her voice, relief maybe, or gratitude that went deeper than a simple mechanical problem warranted. As Ethan examined the bike, he became aware that the woman was watching him with unusual intensity. Most customers either wandered off to find coffee or stood around making small talk about the weather. This one observed his every move as if she were studying him, cataloging his methods and reactions, with the focus of someone accustomed to analyzing people for a living. "Fuel injection system," Ethan diagnosed after a few minutes. "Looks like you've got a clogged injector and possibly a failing fuel pump. Nothing catastrophic, but not something you can fix on the side of the road." "How long?" she asked. "Depends on parts availability. For a custom build like this," Ethan sucked in a breath through his teeth. "Could be a day, could be a week. Los Angeles is probably your best bet for specialized components, but shipping to Copper Creek isn't exactly next-day delivery." He expected her to react the way most travelers did, with frustration, impatience, demands to know about rental cars and alternative transportation. Instead, she looked around the garage with something that might have been curiosity, taking in the hand-painted sign that read, "Carter's Automotive, honest work, fair prices." The coffee pot that had been brewing the same bitter blend since 1987. The wall of photographs showing Big Jim Carter with various customers and community members over the decades. "Carter," she said, reading the sign. "That would make you Ethan Carter. This was my father's place." He passed 3 years ago. Heart attack." Ethan found himself offering more information than he usually shared with strangers. I've been keeping things running since then. She nodded, and again there was that strange intensity in her observation, as if she were filing away every detail for later analysis. I'm Sophia, Sophia Lane. The name meant nothing to Ethan, which seemed to surprise her slightly. Most people, he would later learn, knew exactly who Sophia Lane was, but in Copper Creek, where the internet was spotty, and the biggest news was usually about high school football, or the annual chili cook-off, the names that made headlines in business magazines and financial networks carried no weight. Well, Sophia Lane looks like you're going to be in Copper Creek for a while. Not exactly a tourist destination, I'm afraid. Sometimes the best destinations are the ones you never plan to visit, she said, and there was something wistful in her voice that made Ethan look at her more closely. You can call the parts in from Los Angeles. Ethan continued focusing on the practical matter at hand. Probably looking at $300 to $400 plus labor. He waited for the inevitable negotiation, the attempt to hurry the job or cut corners on the repair. Instead, Sophia Lane nodded as if the cost were irrelevant. Whatever it takes, she said. I'm not in a hurry. This was definitely unusual. In Ethan's experience, people were always in a hurry, especially people with expensive motorcycles who could afford to have them fixed without questioning the cost. But Sophia Lane seemed almost relieved at the prospect of being stranded in Copper Creek for a few days. Is there somewhere to stay in town? She asked. Hotel, motel, bed and breakfast? Ethan almost laughed. Copper Creek isn't exactly set up for the hospitality industry. There's the Desert Rose Motel about 20 miles east on Highway 40, but well, let's just say it's seen better decades. What do locals do when they have visitors? Most folks just put people up on their couches or in spare bedrooms. It's that kind of town. Ethan paused, considering. Mrs. Henderson across the street sometimes rents out her back room to travelers. Clean sheets, home cooking, and she won't charge you city prices. Perfect, Sophia said, and again Ethan was struck by her apparent satisfaction with accommodations that most people in her obvious income bracket would reject without a second thought. As Ethan began the process of ordering parts and organizing the repair, he found himself stealing glances at his unexpected customer. She had wandered over to the wall of photographs, studying them with the kind of attention usually reserved for museum exhibits. Your father built quite a legacy, she said, indicating a picture of Big Jim standing next to a fully restored 1967 Mustang. How long was he in business? 43 years, Ethan replied, pride and pain warring in his voice. Started with nothing but a toolbox and a dream. Built this place from the ground up. And you're carrying it on. Trying to. The words came out more bitter than Ethan had intended. Though some days I wonder if I'm just prolonging the inevitable. Sophia turned from the photographs to look at him directly. What do you mean? Ethan hesitated. He wasn't in the habit of sharing his problems with customers, especially customers he'd known for all of 20 minutes. But there was something about Sophia Lane that invited confidence, a quality of attention that made him feel like his words actually mattered. Town's dying, he said finally. Has been for years. People are moving away, businesses are closing, and the ones that stay can't afford to maintain their vehicles properly. I'm fixing cars on credit more often than not, and the bank... He trailed off, unwilling to admit the full extent of his financial crisis to a stranger. The bank wants its money, Sophia finished for him. Ethan nodded. End of the month. If I can't come up with $14,000, they'll foreclose. Carter's Automotive becomes Carter's Nothing, and another piece of Copper Creek dies. He expected sympathy, maybe some platitudes about how things would work out. Instead, Sophia asked, what would it take to turn things around, hypothetically? The question caught Ethan off guard. I don't know. More customers, I suppose. People with money who need their cars fixed. But those people don't live in Copper Creek anymore, and the ones who pass through usually go to the chain places in Flagstaff or Phoenix. What if they had a reason to come here specifically? Ethan looked at her suspiciously. Are you some kind of business consultant? Sophia smiled, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she looked genuinely relaxed. Something like that. I'm interested in revitalization projects, places with potential that just need the right catalyst. Lady, with all due respect, Copper Creek is past catalysts. This place needs a miracle. Sometimes miracles and catalysts are the same thing, Sophia said. They just look different depending on your perspective. Before Ethan could ask what she meant by that, the bell above the garage door chimed, and Miguel Santos walked in. Miguel was 63 years old, built like a tree stump, and had been farming the same 50 acres outside town since he was 18. His truck was the one currently occupying Ethan's attention, and his timing was as usual problematic. Morning, Ethan, Miguel said, his English still carrying traces of the accent he'd brought from Sonora 45 years earlier. How's she looking? Ethan glanced at Sophia, then back at Miguel. Give me another hour, Miguel. Should have her running smooth. About the payment, Miguel began, his weathered face showing the embarrassment that had become too familiar in recent months. We'll work something out, Ethan said, quickly, acutely aware of Sophia's presence. Like always. Miguel nodded gratefully and turned to leave, then noticed Sophia for the first time. He touched the brim of his hat in the old-fashioned gesture that passed for formal greeting in Copper Creek. Ma'am, he said, welcome to our town. Thank you, Sophia replied. It seems like a special place. Miguel laughed, but it wasn't unkind. Special is one word for it. Most folks use words like forgotten or dying, but I suppose special works too. After Miguel left, Sophia turned back to Ethan with renewed curiosity. He can't pay for the repair. Miguel's had a rough couple of seasons. Drought equipment failures, market prices that barely cover his costs. He's good for it eventually, but eventually doesn't pay my bills. How many customers are in similar situations? Ethan considered the question. Most of them. This isn't exactly a wealthy community. But you keep working for them anyway. What's the alternative? Let their cars break down. Watch them lose their jobs because they can't get to work. Sometimes being a mechanic in a place like this means being a social service as much as a business. Sophia nodded slowly, as if she were filing away this information for future reference. Your father taught you that. My father taught me that a man's worth isn't measured by what he accumulates, but by what he contributes. In Copper Creek, contribution and profit don't always align, and that's why you're facing foreclosure. The blunt statement stung, but Ethan nodded. Being noble doesn't pay the rent. My father never had to face that reality because the town was different then. There was enough paying work to subsidize the charity cases. Now, he shrugged. Now there are mostly charity cases. Sophia walked to the garage's large bay door and looked out at Main Street. From this angle, Copper Creek's decline was painfully obvious. Empty storefronts with faded "for rent" signs, cracked sidewalks where weeds grew through the concrete, the general air of abandonment that settled over places where hope had become a luxury few could afford. What if it wasn't charity? She asked suddenly. What do you mean? What if there was a way to make helping people profitable? What if the business model itself could be restructured to make social contribution economically sustainable? Ethan stared at her. Lady, I fix cars. I don't restructure business models. But you understand this community. You understand what people need, what they can afford, what would make a difference in their lives. That's more valuable than most people realize. There was something in her voice, an undertone of authority, that made Ethan wonder again who exactly Sophia Lane was. She spoke about business restructuring and economic sustainability with the confidence of someone who had done it before, but she was traveling alone on a motorcycle and seemed genuinely interested in staying in a town that most people used as a cautionary tale about economic decline. "Are you going to tell me what you really do for a living?" Ethan asked. Sophia paused, and for a moment Ethan thought she might actually answer honestly. Then she smiled, that enigmatic smile again. "I solve problems," she said, "usually for people who have run out of other options." Before Ethan could pursue the matter further, Mrs. Henderson appeared in the garage doorway, slightly out of breath from what was obviously a hurried walk across the street. "Ethan, dear," she called out, "is this young lady the one who needs a place to stay?" "Mrs. Henderson, meet Sophia Lane." "Sophia, this is Mrs. Henderson. She runs the general store and occasionally takes in strays." Mrs. Henderson beamed at Sophia with the warmth that had made her the unofficial mayor of Copper Creek for the past 20 years. "Any friend of Ethan's is welcome in my home. I've got a lovely room with its own bathroom, and I make the best chicken and dumplings in 3 counties. "That sounds perfect," Sophia said, and Ethan was once again struck by how genuinely pleased she seemed by an offer that most people would consider beneath their standards. "Wonderful. I'll get your room ready right now. Will you be staying long?" "A few days at least. Maybe longer, depending on how things go." Mrs. Henderson practically glowed with satisfaction. Visitors were rare in Copper Creek, and paying visitors were almost mythical. "I'll make up a fresh pot of coffee and put together a welcome basket." "Do you have any dietary restrictions?" "None at all. I eat everything." After Mrs. Henderson bustled away to prepare for her unexpected guest, Sophia turned back to Ethan. "She seems lovely." "Mrs. H is the best. Lost her husband 5 years ago, been keeping the store running, mostly out of stubbornness and community pride. Half the town owes her money for groceries, but she keeps extending credit because she knows people need to eat." Another case of contribution versus profit. Exactly. This whole town runs on that principle. It's what makes us special, and it's what's killing us. Sophia was quiet for a moment, watching as Mrs. Henderson hurried back to her store with obvious excitement. What if it didn't have to be an either-or situation? Meaning, what if there was a way to preserve what makes Copper Creek special while making it economically sustainable? What if the very qualities that are causing the town to struggle could become the foundation for its revival? Ethan set down his wrench and really looked at Sophia for the first time since she'd arrived. "You're not just passing through, are you? What makes you say that? Nobody asks questions like that unless they're planning to stick around for the answers." Sophia smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "Let's just say I'm between opportunities at the moment. Copper Creek seems like as good a place as any to figure out what comes next." "And what is it you're figuring out exactly?" "Whether it's possible to build something meaningful in a world that seems to value only profit margins and quarterly reports." The answer was so unexpected, so different from anything Ethan had been prepared for, that he found himself staring at her with open curiosity. "That's a pretty heavy question for someone passing through on a motorcycle. Sometimes the heaviest questions are the only ones worth asking." Before Ethan could respond, the sound of another vehicle pulling into the lot drew his attention. This time it was Sheriff Tom Bradley driving the town's single patrol car, which was actually a 15-year-old Crown Victoria that Ethan kept running mostly through mechanical wizardry and creative parts sourcing. "Morning, Ethan," Sheriff Bradley called out as he approached. "Heard we had a visitor." Sheriff Bradley, meet Sophia Lane. Her bike broke down, so she'll be staying at Mrs. Henderson's for a few days. Sheriff Bradley touched the brim of his hat in a gesture identical to Miguel's. Welcome to Copper Creek, ma'am. Hope you'll find our town hospitable. I'm sure I will, Sophia replied. Everyone's been very kind. That's our way. We may not have much, but we share what we've got. Sheriff Bradley turned to Ethan. Miguel mentioned his truck would be ready today. Another hour or so. Carburetor rebuild, nothing too complicated. Good man. Miguel's got a load of produce heading to Phoenix tomorrow. Can't afford any delays. Sheriff Bradley paused, studying Sophia with the careful attention of a man who had been keeping the peace in small towns for 30 years. You wouldn't happen to be traveling through on business, would you, Miss Lane? Just exploring, Sophia said. Sometimes you find the most interesting places when you're not looking for anything specific. Sheriff Bradley nodded, apparently satisfied. Well, if you need anything during your stay, don't hesitate to call. Copper Creek takes care of its guests. After the sheriff left, Ethan returned to Miguel's truck, but he was acutely aware of Sophia watching him work. There was something almost meditative about her observation, as if she were studying not just his mechanical skills, but his entire approach to the job. You really know what you're doing, she said after he had successfully diagnosed and begun repairing a complex carburetor problem. 20 years of practice, Ethan replied. Started working on cars when I was 12. My dad always said that if you're going to do something, you might as well do it right. Is that why you won't cut corners for customers who can't pay full price? The question surprised him. How do you know I don't cut corners? Because if you did, word would get around in a town this size. People would stop trusting you. And trust, from what I can see, is the foundation of your entire business model. Ethan paused in his work to look at her. You really are some kind of business consultant, aren't you? I've been known to analyze business models from time to time. And what's your analysis of Carter's automotive? Sophia considered the question seriously. Unsustainable in its current form, but built on fundamentally sound principles. The problem isn't the quality of service or the community relationships. The problem is scale and revenue diversification. Revenue diversification. You're entirely dependent on local customers who have limited resources. You need to find ways to serve markets beyond Copper Creek while maintaining your local commitment. Easier said than done. Rich people don't drive to dying desert towns to get their cars fixed. Maybe they would if they had the right reason. Before Ethan could ask what she meant, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Copper Creek First National, and his stomach immediately tightened. Excuse me, he said to Sophia, then answered the call. Mr. Carter. This is Janet Morrison from the bank. I'm calling about your account status. Mrs. Morrison, I know exactly what my account status is. I've got until the end of the month. Actually, Mr. Carter, there's been a development. The bank has received an offer to purchase your property. A very generous offer. Ethan felt the world shift slightly beneath his feet. What kind of offer? Phoenix Development Group is interested in acquiring your lot for a new truck stop and convenience store. They're willing to pay fair market value plus 20%, which would cover your outstanding debt and leave you with a substantial profit. A truck stop. Ethan looked around the garage that had been his father's life work, trying to imagine it bulldozed and replaced with gas pumps and neon signs. Mrs. Morrison, I'm not interested in selling. Mr. Carter, I understand the sentimental value, but this is a remarkable opportunity. The development group is offering to purchase the property regardless of the building conditions. You wouldn't have to worry about the foreclosure, and you'd have enough money to start fresh somewhere else. Start fresh doing what? This garage is all I know. I'm sure a skilled mechanic like yourself could find work anywhere. Phoenix, Flagstaff, even Las Vegas. There are opportunities in growing cities that simply don't exist in Copper Creek anymore. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, acutely aware that Sophia was listening to every word. How long do I have to decide? The offer is contingent on a quick closure. Phoenix Development needs an answer by Friday. Friday. That's 4 days from now. Mr. Carter, I strongly urge you to consider this offer seriously. It solves all your financial problems and gives you a chance to build a new life somewhere with more opportunities. After Ethan hung up, he stood staring at the phone for a long moment. Sophia waited quietly, but he could feel her attention like a physical presence. Problem, she asked finally. Solution, according to the bank. Ethan's voice was flat. Phoenix Development Group wants to buy this place, turn it into a truck stop. And you don't want to sell. This garage is my father's legacy. It's the last piece of old Copper Creek that still works the way it's supposed to work. If I sell out, he shrugged, then I guess I'm just another person who gave up on this town. But if you don't sell, you lose it anyway. Yeah, but at least I lose it fighting. Sophia was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried a strange undertone that Ethan couldn't quite identify. What if there was a third option? Like what? Like finding a way to save the garage and the town without selling out to developers who don't understand what this place really is. Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in it. Lady, if you've got $14,000 in your back pocket and a plan to revitalize Copper Creek, I'm all ears. Otherwise, we're talking about fantasies. Sometimes fantasies are just realities that haven't been implemented yet. The statement was so matter-of-fact, delivered with such quiet confidence that Ethan found himself looking at Sophia with renewed curiosity. Who are you really? Right now, I'm just someone whose motorcycle broke down in a town that needs help. What I am beyond that? Well, maybe that's something we can figure out together. As the afternoon wore on, Ethan found himself working more slowly than usual, partly because Miguel's truck was particularly challenging, but mostly because he was enjoying Sophia's company. She asked intelligent questions about the repair process, showed genuine interest in the history of Copper Creek, and seemed to possess an endless curiosity about the economics of small-town life. More than that, she listened, really listened in a way that made Ethan feel like his thoughts and opinions actually mattered. It had been a long time since anyone had paid that kind of attention to what he had to say. Tell me about the town at its peak, Sophia said, as Ethan put the finishing touches on Miguel's carburetor rebuild. What was Copper Creek like when your father first opened the garage? Ethan wiped his hands and leaned against the workbench, letting his mind drift back to stories his father had told and his own childhood memories. Different world. Route 66 was still the main way people traveled between California and the East Coast. Copper Creek was a regular stop. Gas food repairs, sometimes overnight stays. Dad used to tell me about fixing cars for movie stars and politicians who broke down on their way to Los Angeles. What changed? Interstate 40 opened in 1975. Suddenly people could drive from Flagstaff to Barstow without ever seeing Copper Creek. The town tried to adapt, put up signs, advertised itself as a historic Route 66 experience, but it was too late. People wanted fast, not historic. And your father, he adapted too for a while. Focused on local customers, built relationships with the farmers and ranchers in the area. For 20 years, it worked. But then the small farms started failing. The young people started leaving for college and never coming back, and the customer base just disappeared. But you stayed. I stayed. Ethan's voice carried a mixture of pride and regret. Even when my high school girlfriend left for Phoenix and begged me to come with her. Even when I got a job offer from a dealership in Flagstaff that would have doubled my income. I stayed because someone had to. That's a big burden for one person to carry. My father carried it for 43 years. Seemed like the least I could do was try to carry it for a few more. Sophia nodded thoughtfully. What if you didn't have to carry it alone? What do you mean? What if there were other people who believed in what Copper Creek represents? What if the town's isolation and authenticity could become assets instead of liabilities? Ethan looked at her skeptically. You make it sound like a business plan. Maybe because it could be. Before Ethan could pursue this line of conversation further, Miguel returned to collect his truck. The old farmer's face lit up when Ethan turned the key and the engine purred to life with smooth precision. Sounds better than she has in months, Miguel said with obvious satisfaction. You're a miracle worker, Ethan. Just good old-fashioned mechanical knowledge, Ethan replied. She should run smooth for a long time now. Miguel reached for his wallet, then hesitated. About the payment. Miguel, let's work out a trade arrangement. You've got that load of vegetables heading to Phoenix tomorrow, right? How about you bring me back a case of that beer I like and we'll call it even? Miguel's relief was obvious. You sure that's a lot less than what this job is worth? It's worth exactly what you can afford to pay. Besides, I've been meaning to try some of those tomatoes you grow. Maybe you could spare a few of those too. Ethan Carter, you're too good for this world, Miguel said, shaking Ethan's hand with genuine gratitude. After Miguel left, Sophia turned to Ethan with an expression that was part admiration and part confusion. You just traded a $200 repair for beer and vegetables. Miguel's a good man who's having a hard time. The repair needed to be done and he needed to make that delivery tomorrow. Sometimes the math isn't about money. But you're facing foreclosure in 4 weeks. 3.5 weeks. And yes, I'm aware of the irony. It's not irony, Sophia said quietly. It's integrity. The question is whether integrity has to be economically suicidal. Ethan was about to respond when another customer arrived. This time, it was Sarah Miller with her 10-year-old Honda Civic. Sarah was 34, a single mother, working 2 jobs to support her 8-year-old daughter, Emma. Her car had been running rough for weeks, but she'd been putting off the repair because money was tight. Hey, Ethan, Sarah called out as she parked near the office. I think I finally need to bite the bullet and get Betsy looked at. What's she doing? Ethan asked, already walking toward the car. Rough idle occasional stalling, and this morning she didn't want to start at all. Ethan popped the hood and immediately spotted the problem. Spark plugs and wires, maybe a fuel filter too. Nothing major, but it needs to be done. How much are we talking? Ethan considered the question, acutely aware that Sophia was watching this interaction with the same intense attention she'd given everything else. Parts and labor probably around $150. Sarah's face fell. I don't suppose you'd consider... could I maybe pay half now and half next month? Sarah, when's the last time you had a full tune-up? Honestly, I can't remember. Tell you what. Let me do a complete service. Plugs, wires, filters, fluids, the works. Call it a back-to-school special. $100 and you can pay me when you can. Ethan, that's not fair to you. Fair is when Emma gets to school on time every day because her mom's car runs properly. Everything else is just bookkeeping. After Sarah left, promising to return the next morning for the service, Sophia shook her head in amazement. You just did it again. Did what? Chose people over profit. How do you stay in business? Obviously, I don't. That's why we're having this conversation in a garage that's about to be foreclosed on. But what if you could? What if there was a way to structure your business so that helping people like Miguel and Sarah actually contributed to your bottom line instead of undermining it? Ethan set down his tools and really looked at Sophia. Okay, I'll bite. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe the problem isn't your business model. Maybe the problem is your market. What if you could attract customers who could afford to pay full price for premium service while still maintaining your commitment to the local community? And how would I do that? Put up a billboard on I-40 advertising authentic small-town automotive experience. Actually, that's not a terrible idea. Ethan stared at her. You're serious? Think about it. People drive hundreds of miles to visit places like Williams or Seligman because they want to experience the real Route 66. What if Copper Creek positioned itself not as a dying town, but as an authentic Western community where traditional values still mean something? That's tourism, not automotive repair. It could be both. What if people came here specifically because they wanted their cars serviced by someone who cares more about quality than quantity? What if the very qualities that make you unmarketable in the modern economy became your unique selling proposition? Ethan found himself caught between skepticism and curiosity. Even if that worked, and I'm not saying it wouldn't happen overnight. I've got 3.5 weeks before the bank takes this place. A lot can happen in 3.5 weeks. Not that much. Sophia smiled that enigmatic smile again. You'd be surprised what's possible when you have the right resources and the right motivation. As the afternoon sun began to slant through the garage's west-facing windows, Ethan realized that for the first time in months, he hadn't spent every moment thinking about the foreclosure notice in his pocket. Sophia Lane had managed to make him believe, however briefly, that there might be alternatives to failure and surrender. Your parts should arrive by Thursday, he told her as they prepared to close up for the day, assuming no shipping delays. That gives us 3 days. 3 days for what? To figure out whether Copper Creek is worth saving. Ethan locked up the garage and walked with Sophia across the street to Mrs. Henderson's store. The evening air was cooling rapidly, the way it did in the desert, and the silence was broken only by the distant sound of wind chimes on someone's porch. Ethan, Sophia said, as they reached the store's entrance, what would it mean to you if you could save this place? Not just the garage, but the whole town. It would mean everything, he said without hesitation. But I learned a long time ago that wanting something and being able to make it happen are two different things. Sometimes they're closer than you think. As Sophia disappeared into Mrs. Henderson's welcoming embrace, Ethan stood alone on Main Street, looking at the town that had shaped his entire life. 3 streetlights illuminated the empty road, casting long shadows between the abandoned storefronts and the handful of businesses still clinging to existence. For the first time since his father's death, Ethan allowed himself to imagine a different future. Not the defeat he'd been expecting, not the victory he'd stopped believing in, but something else entirely. A possibility that hadn't existed before a mysterious woman on a broken motorcycle had rolled into his life and started asking dangerous questions about the relationship between integrity and sustainability. Tomorrow, he would start working on Sarah's car and continue waiting for parts for Sophia's motorcycle. But tonight, for the first time in months, Ethan Carter went to sleep, believing that maybe, just maybe, the story of Copper Creek wasn't over yet. The desert wind whispered through the empty streets, carrying with it the scent of sage and possibility, while somewhere in Mrs. Henderson's back room, a billionaire in disguise stared at the ceiling and wondered if she had finally found something worth more than all the money in the world. The next morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made the Arizona desert look like a postcard, all endless blue sky and golden light that seemed to transform even the most mundane objects into something worth photographing. Ethan was already at work by 6:30, partly because he'd always been an early riser, but mostly because sleep had been elusive after his conversation with Sophia Lane. He was rebuilding Sarah Miller's carburetor when he heard the sound of footsteps approaching across the gravel lot. Looking up, he was surprised to see Sophia herself, dressed in jeans and a simple white t-shirt that somehow managed to look both casual and expensive. She carried 2 cups of coffee and a brown paper bag that smelled suspiciously like Mrs. Henderson's famous blueberry muffins. "Thought you might need fuel," she said, offering him one of the cups. "Mrs. Henderson said you usually skip breakfast." "Mrs. H talks too much," Ethan replied, but he accepted the coffee gratefully. The first sip revealed that it was actually good coffee, not the bitter brew he usually made in the garage's ancient pot. "This isn't from Henderson's." "I may have brought a few supplies with me," Sophia said with a slight smile. "Call it a habit of being prepared for emergencies." A motorcycle breakdown constitutes an emergency that requires gourmet coffee. You'd be surprised what constitutes an emergency when you're used to a certain standard of living. It was the first time Sophia had hinted at wealth, and Ethan found himself studying her more carefully. The jeans were definitely designer, probably worth more than most people in Copper Creek spent on clothes in a year. The watch on her wrist was understated, but elegant, the kind of timepiece that whispered rather than shouted its value. Even her posture spoke of confidence and control, the bearing of someone accustomed to being listened to when she spoke. "So, what do you do when you're not wandering the desert on a motorcycle?" Ethan asked, settling into the comfortable rhythm of working while talking. "I solve problems," Sophia said, which was the same non-answer she'd given the day before. "Mostly for organizations that have grown too big to remember what they were originally supposed to accomplish." "That's pretty vague." "Specificity is overrated. The problems are usually the same. People lose sight of their core mission because they get caught up in systems and metrics that have nothing to do with why they started the organization in the first place." Ethan paused in his work to look at her. "You sound like you're speaking from experience." "More experience than I'd like to admit." Before Ethan could pursue the matter further, Sheriff Bradley's patrol car pulled into the lot, followed immediately by a vehicle that definitely didn't belong in Copper Creek. A black sedan with tinted windows and the kind of aggressive styling that suggested either government work or corporate security. "Expecting company?" Sophia asked, and there was something in her voice that made Ethan glance at her sharply. "Not that I know of." Sheriff Bradley emerged from his car looking distinctly uncomfortable, followed by 2 men in dark suits who surveyed the garage with the systematic attention of people conducting an assessment. The taller of the 2 men approached Ethan with the confident stride of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. "Mr. Carter, I'm Richard Morrison from Phoenix Development Group. I believe your bank may have mentioned our interest in your property." Ethan set down his tools deliberately, taking his time to wipe his hands before responding. "They mentioned it. I told them I wasn't interested." "Mr. Carter, I don't think you fully understand the opportunity we're presenting. This isn't just about buying your garage. We're talking about bringing real economic development to Copper Creek. Jobs increase tax revenue, a reason for people to stop here instead of driving straight through to Flagstaff." "What kind of jobs?" Ethan asked. "Service industry positions, cashiers, maintenance staff, food service. Clean work, steady hours, benefits. Minimum wage jobs," Ethan translated. Morrison's smile never wavered. "Entry-level positions with advancement opportunities. Mr. Carter, the reality is that Copper Creek is dying. Our development would breathe new life into this community. By bulldozing the businesses that are still here. By replacing obsolete infrastructure with modern facilities that can actually serve the traveling public. Your garage is charming, in a nostalgic way, but it's not economically viable in the current market." Ethan was aware that Sophia had moved closer, positioning herself where she could observe the entire conversation without drawing attention to herself. And what makes you think a truck stop will succeed where local businesses have failed? Market research, Mr. Carter. We know exactly how much traffic passes through this area on Interstate 40. We know what travelers want. Fast service, familiar brands, clean facilities. Your garage offers none of those things. No, Ethan said quietly. It offers something different. Sentiment doesn't pay bills, Mr. Carter. Our offer does. Sheriff Bradley stepped forward, his discomfort obvious. Richard, maybe we should give Ethan some time to think about this. Unfortunately, Sheriff, time is exactly what we don't have. The financing for this project is contingent on rapid development. We need Mr. Carter's decision by Friday, or we'll have to look at alternative sites. Alternative sites? Ethan asked. There are other properties in Copper Creek that would suit our needs. Mrs. Henderson's store, for instance. Or the old Williams place on the east side of town. But your location is ideal because of the existing automotive infrastructure. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Phoenix Development would get their truck stop in Copper Creek with or without Ethan's cooperation. If he refused to sell, they would simply target someone else's property, and Ethan would still lose his garage to foreclosure while watching the town transform into something unrecognizable. I need to think about it, Ethan said finally. Of course, but don't think too long. Friday is a firm deadline. After the developers left, Sheriff Bradley lingered, clearly wanting to say something, but struggling to find the words. Tom, just say whatever you're thinking, Ethan told him. I don't like those guys, the sheriff said bluntly. Something about this whole deal feels wrong. But Ethan, I've got to tell you, the town council is split on this. Half of them see dollar signs and the other half are scared of what happens if you don't sell, and they go after someone else's property instead. What do you think I should do? I think you should do whatever lets you sleep at night. But I also think you should know that Mrs. Henderson got a visit from those same guys yesterday. They made her an offer too. Ethan felt his stomach drop. She didn't mention it. She's scared, Ethan. Scared of making the wrong choice, scared of what happens to the town either way. This whole situation has people on edge. After Sheriff Bradley left, Ethan stood in the garage feeling like the walls were closing in around him. 3.5 weeks had suddenly become 4 days, and the choice had evolved from keeping or losing his garage to determining the entire future of Copper Creek. They're very good at what they do, Sophia said quietly. What do you mean, Sean? The divide and conquer strategy. Make everyone feel like they have to choose between economic survival and community preservation. Frame it as a binary choice so people don't look for third alternatives. Maybe because there aren't any third alternatives. There are always third alternatives. The question is whether anyone has the vision to see them and the resources to implement them. Ethan looked at her sharply. Resources. Intellectual resources. Creative resources. The kind of resources that come from understanding systems and knowing how to change them. You keep talking like you know something the rest of us don't. Maybe I do. Before Ethan could ask what she meant, Mrs. Henderson appeared in the garage doorway, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by obvious anxiety. Ethan, dear, could I speak with you for a moment? And perhaps Sophia could join us as well. They followed Mrs. Henderson across the street to her store, where she immediately began bustling around, making tea with the nervous energy of someone who needed to keep her hands busy while dealing with stress. Those men came to see me yesterday, she said without preamble. Phoenix Development. They made me an offer for the store. What kind of offer? Ethan asked. Generous. More than generous, really. Enough money to retire comfortably, maybe move to Phoenix to be closer to my sister. Mrs. Henderson's hands shook slightly as she poured hot water into a ceramic teapot. But Ethan, this store has been my life for 23 years. Before that, it was the Hendersons' life for 40 years before that. How do you put a price on that kind of history? You don't have to sell, Ethan said. Don't I? If you sell your garage, they'll build their truck stop. And my little store will be competing with a convenience store that has corporate backing and national brand recognition. How long do you think I'll last? And if I don't sell, then they'll probably make me a better offer, and eventually I'll be forced to take it just to survive. Either way, Henderson's general store becomes a memory. Sophia had been listening without comment, but now she spoke up. What if there was a way to preserve both businesses while still bringing economic development to Copper Creek? Mrs. Henderson looked at her with desperate hope. How? What if the development worked with existing businesses instead of replacing them? What if the goal was to enhance Copper Creek's unique character instead of erasing it? That sounds wonderful in theory. Mrs. Henderson said, but I don't think Phoenix Development is interested in preservation. They want efficiency and profit margins. Then maybe Phoenix Development isn't the right partner for Copper Creek. Ethan stared at Sophia. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe it's time to stop reacting to other people's plans and start making some plans of your own. Plans require money, and in case you haven't noticed, money is exactly what this town doesn't have. Money isn't the only form of capital, Sophia said. Copper Creek has assets that most communities would kill for. Authenticity, character, a strong sense of community-skilled craftspeople, beautiful natural surroundings. The question is how to leverage those assets into sustainable economic development. Mrs. Henderson set down her teacup with a decisive click. Sophia, you've been asking a lot of questions since you arrived. Maybe it's time you answered a few. Who are you really? And why do you care what happens to a dying town in the middle of nowhere? Sophia was quiet for a long moment, and Ethan could see her weighing how much to reveal. I'm someone who spent most of her adult life in boardrooms and corner offices, watching communities like Copper Creek get sacrificed for quarterly profit reports. I'm tired of being part of the problem. That still doesn't tell us who you are, Ethan pointed out. Right now, I'm someone whose motorcycle broke down at exactly the right time in exactly the right place. Maybe that's all you need to know. Before anyone could press the matter further, the bell above the store's door chimed, and Miguel Santos entered, his weathered face creased with worry. Mrs. Henderson, Ethan, I hope I'm not interrupting, but I need to talk to both of you. What's wrong, Miguel? Mrs. Henderson asked. Those development people came to see me this morning. They want to buy my farm. Ethan felt the pieces clicking into place. Let me guess. They made you an offer you can't refuse. 50% above market value, cash deal, quick closing. They say they want to build a trucking depot and logistics center, create jobs, bring commerce to the area, and destroy the agricultural base that sustained this community for generations, Mrs. Henderson said quietly. I don't want to sell, Miguel said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. That land has been in my family for 45 years. My father's buried in the cemetery on the hill overlooking the north pasture. But these last few years have been so hard, and if I'm honest, 50% above market value would solve a lot of problems. Miguel, Ethan said, what if there was another way? What if you could make the farm profitable without selling it? How the market prices for produce barely cover my costs, and the big chains only want to deal with large-scale operations. Sophia leaned forward with sudden intensity. What if you weren't selling to big chains? What if you were selling to people who valued quality and local sourcing enough to pay premium prices? Where am I going to find customers like that? What if they came to you? Miguel looked confused. I don't understand. Agritourism, Sophia explained. Farm-to-table dining experiences. People who want to connect with their food sources, understand where their meals come from, experience authentic agricultural life. The market for that kind of experience is enormous and growing. You want me to turn my farm into a tourist attraction? I want you to turn your farm into a destination. A place where people come not just to buy vegetables, but to understand how they're grown, to meet the person who grows them, to be part of a story that connects them to the land and the community. Mrs. Henderson was nodding slowly, like the lavender farms in Oregon or those pick-your-own-apple orchards in Washington. Exactly. But more than that, integrate it with the other businesses in town. People come to Miguel's farm for the authentic agricultural experience. They eat lunch at Mrs. Henderson's store. They get their cars serviced at Carter's Automotive while they're touring the area. Instead of competing with each other for a shrinking customer base, you create a network of experiences that draws people to Copper Creek, specifically because they can't get this combination anywhere else. Ethan found himself caught between skepticism and fascination. That's a pretty elaborate vision for someone whose motorcycle just happened to break down here. Sometimes elaborate visions are exactly what dying towns need. And sometimes they're just fantasies that sound good until you try to implement them. There's only one way to find out which this is. Miguel was studying Sophia with the careful attention of a man who had learned to evaluate both opportunities and risks with equal precision. You really think people would come to Copper Creek for something like this? I think people are hungry for authenticity in a world that's becoming increasingly artificial. I think they want to support communities that preserve traditional values and ways of life. And I think they're willing to pay for experiences that connect them to something real. But how do we reach these people? How do we let them know what we're offering? Marketing, Sophia said simply. Strategic positioning. Building partnerships with organizations that serve the kind of customers who would value what Copper Creek has to offer. Marketing costs money, Mrs. Henderson pointed out. Money none of us have. Not all marketing costs money. Some marketing is just about telling your story to the right people in the right way. Before anyone could ask what she meant by that, the store's phone rang. Mrs. Henderson answered it, and after a brief conversation, she hung up with a troubled expression. That was Sarah Miller, she said. Phoenix Development just made her an offer for her house. Ethan felt anger rising in his chest. Sarah's house isn't even for sale. Apparently, they're interested in the entire block where she lives. They want to build employee housing for their truck stop complex. They're trying to buy the whole town, Miguel said with dawning understanding. Not buy it, Sophia corrected. Transform it into something completely different. Replace the existing community with a planned development that serves their business model. How do we stop them? Mrs. Henderson asked. By offering a better alternative. In 4 days, a lot can happen in 4 days if you have the right strategy and the right resources. Ethan looked at Sophia with growing suspicion. You keep talking about resources and strategy like you know exactly what you're talking about. What aren't you telling us? Sophia met his gaze steadily. I'm telling you that Phoenix Development isn't the only organization with the ability to make things happen quickly. I'm telling you that there are people who believe in preserving communities like Copper Creek, and some of those people have the resources to make preservation economically viable. What people? People who understand that sustainable economic development doesn't have to mean destroying everything that makes a place worth preserving. Before Ethan could press her further, another customer arrived at the garage. This time it was Dr. Amanda Foster, who ran the town's small medical clinic and drove a 15-year-old Subaru that required regular maintenance to keep running. Ethan, I hate to bother you, but I think my transmission is starting to slip, Dr. Foster called out as she parked near the garage. I'll be right there, Doc, Ethan replied, then turned back to Sophia. This conversation isn't over. I'm counting on it. As Ethan examined Dr. Foster's car, he was acutely aware that Sophia had followed him and was once again observing his work with that intense analytical attention. Dr. Foster, meanwhile, was sharing the news that Phoenix Development had approached her as well, offering to buy the building that housed her clinic. They said they could help me relocate to a new medical facility in their truck stop complex, Dr. Foster explained. Modern equipment, better space, steady traffic from travelers who might need medical attention. But, Ethan prompted, hearing the uncertainty in her voice. But I didn't become a doctor to treat tourists with upset stomachs and minor injuries. I became a doctor to serve this community. Half my patients are elderly, and most of them don't have reliable transportation. If I move my practice to a truck stop 5 miles outside town, how are they going to get the care they need? Did you tell the developers that? I tried to. They said the economics of modern healthcare require serving a broader patient base than Copper Creek can provide. They said I could still treat local patients, but I'd need to expand my services to include travelers and truckers to make the practice financially viable. Sophia stepped forward. Dr. Foster, what if there was a way to serve a broader patient base while keeping your practice in the heart of the community? I'm listening. Telemedicine, health and wellness tourism. People who come to Copper Creek not just for the authentic small-town experience, but because they want access to personalized health care from a doctor who has time to really listen to their concerns. Dr. Foster looked intrigued. You mean like a medical retreat? More like a return to old-fashioned doctoring, but marketed to people who can't get that kind of attention in urban medical systems. People who want a doctor who knows their name and their history, who can spend 30 minutes with them instead of 30 seconds. That's an interesting idea, but it would require completely restructuring my practice. Everything worth doing requires restructuring something. As Dr. Foster drove away, promising to think about the various options she'd been presented with, Ethan turned to Sophia with a mixture of admiration and frustration. You have an answer for everything, don't you? I have suggestions for everything. Whether they're answers depends on whether people are willing to implement them. Implementation requires more than good ideas. It requires capital planning, marketing expertise, regulatory knowledge, risk assessment, all of which can be obtained if you know where to look and how to ask. Sophia, who the hell are you? She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. I'm someone who has spent the last 15 years building and running organizations that are supposed to make people's lives better. I'm someone who has watched communities like Copper Creek get destroyed by people who measure success only in quarterly profit margins. And I'm someone who is tired of being part of a system that treats places like this as expendable. That's still not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you right now. Before Ethan could press the matter further, his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but when he answered, the voice was familiar. Mr. Carter, this is Richard Morrison from Phoenix Development. I wanted to follow up on our conversation this morning. I told you I'd think about it, and I appreciate that. But I wanted to make sure you understood the full scope of what we're offering. This isn't just about your garage anymore. We've been in discussions with several other property owners in Copper Creek, and the response has been very positive. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. How positive? Let's just say that with or without your cooperation, Phoenix Development will be moving forward with our plans for Copper Creek. The question is whether you want to be a beneficiary of that development or an obstacle to it. Are you threatening me? I'm offering you an opportunity to be part of something bigger than yourself. But opportunities have expiration dates, Mr. Carter. Friday is yours. After Morrison hung up, Ethan stood holding the phone and feeling like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. Phoenix Development wasn't just buying properties. They were systematically targeting every key business and property owner in Copper Creek, creating a situation where resistance became economically impossible. They're moving fast, Sophia observed. They're moving smart. Divide and conquer, just like you said. Make everyone feel like they're the only ones standing in the way of progress. But they're not progress. They're just change. And change without direction is just chaos with better marketing. Ethan looked at her intently. Sophia, if you know something that could help this town, if you have connections or resources or expertise that could make a difference now, would be a really good time to share that information. What if I told you that I might be able to help, that I might know people who could provide the kind of support Copper Creek needs to implement a real revitalization plan? I'd ask what the catch is. The catch is that you'd have to trust me, all of you. Mrs. Henderson, Miguel, Dr. Foster. Everyone who cares about this community. You'd have to trust me with something more valuable than money. Which is hope. As the afternoon sun slanted through the garage windows, Ethan found himself at a crossroads that extended far beyond his individual circumstances. The choice was no longer just about saving his father's garage. It was about determining whether communities like Copper Creek had any future at all, or whether they were destined to be consumed by development that valued efficiency over authenticity, profit over people. What exactly are you proposing? He asked. I'm proposing that we find out how serious Phoenix Development is about their Friday deadline. I'm proposing that we spend the next 3 days creating an alternative that's so compelling, so well-designed, and so economically viable that everyone in Copper Creek chooses community over corporate development. And how do we do that? We start by bringing everyone together. Mrs. Henderson, Miguel, Dr. Foster, Sheriff Bradley. Anyone else who has a stake in this town's future. We lay out exactly what Phoenix Development is offering, exactly what it would mean for Copper Creek, and exactly what the alternatives might be. Alternatives that you haven't actually explained yet. Alternatives that I can't explain until I know whether people are serious about exploring them. Ethan studied her face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation, but finding only determination and something that might have been desperation. Why does this matter to you, really? Because I've spent too many years watching places like Copper Creek disappear. Because I'm tired of being part of a system that values expansion over preservation. And because sometimes when your motorcycle breaks down in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, you get a chance to be part of something that actually matters. As the sun began to set over Copper Creek, painting the desert sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ethan made a decision that would change everything. Okay, he said. Let's see what you've got. Call everyone. Tell them we're having a meeting tonight at the garage. Tell them it's about the future of Copper Creek. And tell them that for the first time in a long time, that future might include something other than surrender. By 7 o'clock that evening, Carter's Automotive had been transformed from a working garage into an impromptu community center. Ethan had pushed the larger equipment against the walls and arranged folding chairs in a rough circle while Mrs. Henderson had arrived with coffee sandwiches and the kind of determined optimism that had sustained Copper Creek through 40 years of gradual decline. The overhead fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the assembled faces, making everyone look older and more weathered than they actually were. Miguel Santos sat with his weathered hands folded in his lap, still wearing the work clothes that smelled of earth and honest labor. Dr. Foster had closed her clinic early to attend her usually pristine appearance slightly rumpled from a long day of treating everything from childhood ear infections to elderly arthritis complaints. Sheriff Bradley occupied a chair near the garage's main entrance, his positioning both casual and strategic, while Sarah Miller sat clutching a cup of coffee as if it were a lifeline, her babysitter money well spent on what might be the most important meeting in Copper Creek's recent history. Sophia Lane stood near the workbench, and for the first time since arriving in town, she looked nervous. The confident demeanor that had characterized her previous interactions had been replaced by something more vulnerable, more human. She had changed from her casual jeans into what was obviously an expensive business suit, and the transformation was startling. Gone was the mysterious motorcycle traveler. In her place stood someone who clearly belonged in boardrooms and corner offices. "Before we begin," Ethan said, his voice carrying across the garage's acoustic deadness, "I think we all deserve to know exactly who we're talking to. Sophia, you've been asking questions and making suggestions since you arrived, but you haven't been entirely honest about who you are or why you're really here." Sophia took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone preparing to reveal a truth that would change everything. "My name is Sophia Lane, and I'm the CEO of Lane Industries, a company that owns manufacturing facilities, real estate developments, and technology firms across 17 states." The silence that followed this revelation was profound. Mrs. Henderson's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. Miguel's eyes widened with something that might have been recognition, while Dr. Foster leaned forward with sudden, intense attention. "Lane Industries," Sheriff Bradley said slowly. "That's the company that built those luxury resorts in Montana and Colorado. The ones that preserved the historic mining towns instead of bulldozing them. Among other projects, yes." Sarah Miller set down her coffee with a sharp click. "You're a billionaire." "That's not the relevant part." "The hell it isn't," Ethan said, his voice tight with what sounded like betrayal. "You've been walking around here for 2 days, letting us think you were just some lost traveler when you're actually richer than everyone in this room combined." "Ethan, let me explain." "Explain what?" "That this has all been some kind of game that you've been amusing yourself by watching small-town people scramble around trying to solve problems you could fix with pocket change." Sophia's composure cracked slightly, revealing something raw underneath. "It hasn't been a game. If anything, it's been the most honest 2 days I've experienced in 15 years. Honest?" Mrs. Henderson's voice carried a hurt that cut through the garage's tension. "You lied to us about who you are." "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you something that would have changed how you treated me, how you talked to me, what you were willing to share with me. When was the last time any of you had a conversation with a billionaire CEO where you felt comfortable being completely honest about your problems and fears?" The question hung in the air, and Ethan realized with uncomfortable clarity that she was right. If he had known who Sophia really was when she first walked into his garage, he never would have shared his financial problems, never would have admitted his fears about losing the business, never would have let her see the vulnerability that came with watching something you loved slowly die. "Why?" Dr. Foster asked quietly. "Why hide who you are? Why come to Copper Creek at all?" Sophia moved to the center of the circle, her expensive suit incongruous against the garage's oil-stained concrete floor. "Because I'm tired of being Sophia Lane CEO. I'm tired of board meetings where communities like this one are discussed as market opportunities or development targets. I'm tired of approving projects that make financial sense but destroy everything that makes a place worth preserving. So you thought you'd play dress-up and see how the other half lives." Ethan's anger was still evident, but there was something else underneath it now. A hurt that went deeper than simple deception. I thought I'd try to understand what was actually at stake before I made any decisions about what to do next. Miguel leaned forward in his chair. What kind of decisions? Phoenix Development Group isn't an independent company. They're a subsidiary of Morrison Holdings, which is owned by a consortium of investors that includes my biggest competitor, Titan Corporation. This entire project is designed to test a new model for rural development. Buy up distressed communities at below-market prices, transform them into standardized commercial developments, then replicate the model across the rural Southwest. You're saying Copper Creek is an experiment? Sheriff Bradley asked. I'm saying Copper Creek is the prototype. If Phoenix Development succeeds here, if they can prove that small desert communities can be profitably transformed into truck stop complexes and logistics centers, they'll take the model to every similar town between here and Albuquerque. The implications of this revelation settled over the group like a physical weight. What they had thought was a local crisis was actually part of a much larger strategy, one that threatened dozens of communities across the region. And you know this how? Ethan asked. Because Titan Corporation approached Lane Industries 6 months ago with a partnership proposal. They wanted to use our expertise in sustainable development to legitimize their rural expansion program. They wanted me to be the face of responsible growth while they systematically eliminated small-town America. What did you tell them? I told them I needed time to consider the proposal. What I actually needed was to understand what their development model would mean for places like Copper Creek. So I started visiting rural communities that were facing similar pressures. How many communities? Mrs. Henderson asked. 17. Copper Creek is number 18. And what happened to the other 17? Sophia's silence was answer enough. Sarah Miller stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the concrete floor. So you've been watching communities like ours get destroyed, and now you're here to, what, salve your conscience before you help destroy another one? I'm here because I think there might be a way to stop it. By throwing money at the problem. By proving that sustainable development can be more profitable than destructive development. By demonstrating that preserving community character and promoting economic growth aren't mutually exclusive goals. Ethan found himself studying Sophia with new eyes, trying to reconcile the woman who had spent 2 days asking thoughtful questions about small-town economics with the billionaire CEO who apparently held the fate of rural communities in her hands. You're talking about using Copper Creek as a counterexample. I'm talking about using Copper Creek as a proof of concept, a demonstration that rural revitalization can be accomplished without sacrificing the things that make rural communities worth preserving in the first place. And if it doesn't work, then Phoenix Development gets what they want. Titan Corporation expands their rural development program, and communities like Copper Creek become footnotes in quarterly earnings reports. Dr. Foster had been listening with the analytical attention she usually reserved for complex medical diagnoses. What exactly are you proposing? Sophia walked to the workbench where Ethan kept his laptop, an ancient machine that somehow still managed to connect to the internet on days when the service was working. May I? Ethan nodded, and Sophia opened the computer, her fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Within moments, she had pulled up a presentation that was obviously professional, comprehensive, and expensive. This is the Copper Creek Revitalization Initiative, she said, turning the screen so everyone could see. A comprehensive development plan that preserves existing businesses while creating new economic opportunities based on the community's authentic character and assets. The first slide showed an aerial photograph of Copper Creek as it currently existed, followed by architectural renderings that depicted the same streets and buildings, but enhanced and revitalized rather than replaced. Carter's Automotive remained in its current location, but with expanded facilities and updated equipment. Henderson's General Store retained its historic facade while incorporating modern retail concepts. Miguel's farm was shown as the centerpiece of an agritourism complex that included educational facilities and farm-to-table dining options. "You've been planning this the whole time," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice carrying a mixture of amazement and suspicion. "I've been planning something like this for months. What I didn't know until this week was whether Copper Creek was the right place to implement it. And now you do. Now I know that Copper Creek has something most communities have lost. People who still believe that taking care of each other is more important than maximizing individual profit. That's not just admirable, it's economically valuable in ways that most development models completely ignore." Ethan studied the renderings with growing amazement. The plans showed his garage not just preserved, but expanded with modern diagnostic equipment, additional service bays, and what appeared to be some kind of educational facility attached to the main building. "What's this part?" "The Southwest Automotive Heritage Center, a working museum where people can learn about automotive history while watching actual restoration work being performed. You'd be training apprentices in traditional mechanical skills while serving as the centerpiece of a heritage tourism program." Heritage tourism, people who travel specifically to experience authentic local culture and traditional crafts. The market for that kind of tourism is enormous and growing, especially among people who want alternatives to standardized vacation experiences. Miguel was staring at the renderings of his farm with obvious fascination. "Those buildings, what are they?" "Farm-to-Table Restaurant Educational Center for Sustainable Agriculture. Guest accommodations for people who want to experience working farm life. You'd still be growing the same crops you grow now, but you'd also be teaching people about sustainable farming, hosting agricultural workshops, and supplying a restaurant that serves cuisine based entirely on ingredients grown within 50 miles of Copper Creek. People would really come here for that. Miguel, there are people in Los Angeles and Phoenix who pay premium prices for vegetables that were grown by farmers they've never met, shipped hundreds of miles and sold in stores that look exactly like every other store in America. Imagine what they'd pay for vegetables they watched you grow, prepared by chefs they could talk to, served in a restaurant where they could see the fields where their food originated." Dr. Foster was examining the medical facility plans with obvious interest. "This looks like a combination clinic and wellness center. Telemedicine hub, wellness retreat, and traditional medical practice. You'd serve local patients just like you do now, but you'd also provide healthcare services for tourists and remote consultations for patients who want access to personalized medicine without the impersonal atmosphere of urban medical systems. The infrastructure requirements alone," Dr. Foster began, "are significant but manageable. High-speed internet, upgraded medical equipment, additional space for wellness programs, all covered by the development budget." Sheriff Bradley had been notably quiet during the presentation, but now he leaned forward with obvious concern. "This all sounds wonderful, but what's the catch? What does Lane Industries get out of this? A successful model for sustainable rural development that we can license to other communities facing similar challenges, plus a reputation for responsible development that differentiates us from competitors who only know how to build strip malls and truck stops. And if it fails, then I lose a significant investment and Copper Creek ends up exactly where it would have been if I'd never shown up." Sarah Miller had been studying the plans with growing excitement. "What about housing employment opportunities for people who aren't farmers or mechanics or doctors? Construction jobs during the development phase, service positions in the tourism and hospitality sectors afterward. Plus, remote work opportunities for people who want to live in small communities but work for companies based in larger cities. Remote work, high-speed internet infrastructure, makes it possible for people to live anywhere while maintaining careers that previously required urban proximity. Copper Creek could become a destination for people who want small-town life without sacrificing professional opportunities. Ethan found himself torn between excitement and skepticism. The plans were comprehensive, well-designed, and obviously expensive. They addressed every concern that had been raised about Copper Creek's economic future while preserving everything that made the community worth saving. They were also almost too good to be true. "What's the timeline?" he asked. Phase 1 implementation begins immediately upon approval. Critical infrastructure improvements within 60 days, initial business enhancements within 6 months, full program implementation within 18 months. How immediately is immediately? Construction crews could be here by Monday. The garage fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications of what Sophia was proposing. This wasn't just an alternative to Phoenix Development's truck stop. It was a complete reimagining of what rural economic development could look like. Mrs. Henderson was the first to speak. "Sophia, this is incredible, but I have to ask, why didn't you just tell us who you were from the beginning? Why go through the charade of being a stranded traveler?" "Because I needed to understand what this community was really like before I committed to investing in its future. I needed to know whether the people of Copper Creek were genuinely committed to taking care of each other, or whether that was just a romanticized notion that would disappear as soon as real money was involved." "And what did you conclude?" "I concluded that Copper Creek has something that money can't buy and corporate development can't replicate. Authentic community relationships built on mutual support and shared values. That's not just admirable, it's the foundation for a sustainable economic model that could serve as an example for rural communities across the country." Miguel had been studying the farm development plans with obvious fascination, but now he looked up with a practical question. "What happens to people like me who don't know anything about running tourist operations? I'm a farmer, not a hospitality manager." "You remain a farmer. Lane Industries provides the hospitality management expertise, marketing support, and operational infrastructure. You continue doing what you do best, while we handle the aspects of the business that require different skills." "But it's still my farm." "It's still your farm. You retain ownership of the land and primary decision-making authority such over agricultural operations. Lane Industries becomes a partner in developing tourism and educational programs that enhance rather than replace your existing farming activities." Dr. Foster leaned back in her chair with obvious relief. "So I wouldn't have to choose between serving my current patients and participating in the development program." "The development program is designed to enhance your ability to serve current patients while expanding your practice to include services that aren't currently available in rural areas. Better equipment, additional specialists through telemedicine partnerships, wellness programs that could benefit everyone in the community." Ethan found himself staring at the renderings of his garage, trying to imagine what it would be like to have modern equipment, adequate space, and a steady stream of customers who appreciated quality work. "What about the Automotive Heritage Center? How would that work?" "You'd continue operating Carter's Automotive exactly as you do now, serving local customers, maintaining community vehicles, preserving the personal relationships that make your business special. The Heritage Center would operate alongside your regular business, attracting visitors who want to learn about automotive history and traditional repair techniques. Teaching people to work on cars. Teaching people to appreciate the craftsmanship and knowledge that goes into quality automotive repair. Most people today have no understanding of how their vehicles actually work. There's a huge market for educational experiences that connect people with traditional skills and crafts. And you think people would pay to watch me rebuild carburetors? I think people would pay premium prices to learn from someone who represents a disappearing tradition of quality craftsmanship. You're not just a mechanic, Ethan. You're a keeper of knowledge that most of the world has forgotten. Sheriff Bradley had been listening with the careful attention of someone evaluating both opportunities and risks. What about regulatory issues, zoning permits, environmental compliance? All handled as part of the development process. Lane Industries has legal and regulatory teams that specialize in rural development projects. We ensure full compliance with all applicable regulations, while expediting the approval process through established relationships with relevant agencies. And Phoenix Development. Phoenix Development's offer expires Friday. If Copper Creek chooses the revitalization initiative instead, Phoenix Development loses their option to purchase properties in the area. They're not going to be happy about that. No, they're not. But their unhappiness becomes irrelevant once the community commits to an alternative development path. Sarah Miller had been quiet for several minutes, but now she spoke up with obvious emotion. This sounds like everything we could possibly hope for. It's almost too good to be true. What's the real catch? Sophia met her gaze directly. The real catch is that it requires everyone in this room to trust me with something more valuable than money, the future of your community. If this fails, if the model doesn't work, if the economics don't sustain themselves, Copper Creek doesn't get a second chance. And if it succeeds, Copper Creek becomes a model for sustainable rural development that could be replicated in communities across the country. You become pioneers in a movement that could reshape how America thinks about small-town economic development. Mrs. Henderson set down her coffee cup with a decisive click. I have one more question, and I want a completely honest answer. Of course. Why should we trust you? You've admitted that you lied about who you are, that you've been conducting some kind of experiment on our community, that you have financial interests that extend far beyond Copper Creek. Why should we believe that you genuinely care about what happens to us? Sophia was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. Because I grew up in a place like Copper Creek, a small farming community in Iowa that died while I was in college, killed by the same kind of development pressures you're facing now. I've spent 15 years building a business empire that's supposed to make communities stronger, but I've watched dozens of places like my hometown disappear while I was focused on quarterly profit reports and shareholder returns. What was the name of your hometown? Cedar Falls. Population 612 when I left for college. Population 0 today. The entire town was purchased by agricultural conglomerates and demolished to create larger, more efficient farming operations. What happened to the people? Some moved to larger cities. Some found work with the agricultural companies that replaced their family farms. Most just disappeared into the anonymous landscape of modern America. Their stories, their traditions, their way of life, all gone as if they had never existed. The garage was completely silent now, the weight of Sophia's revelations settling over the group like a shroud. Everyone present understood the implications of what she was saying. Copper Creek was facing the same fate that had claimed her hometown, and dozens of others like it. So this is personal for you, Ethan said quietly. This is deeply personal for me. Copper Creek is my chance to prove that communities like this can survive and thrive without sacrificing everything that makes them worth preserving. It's my chance to prevent what happened to Cedar Falls from happening here. And if you say no, I respect your decision and leave town as quietly as I arrived. Phoenix Development gets what they want, and I go back to building shopping centers and office complexes for people who measure success only in quarterly earnings reports. Miguel shifted in his chair, his weathered hands clasped tightly in his lap. How long do we have to decide? Phoenix Development's deadline is Friday. I need an answer by Thursday morning to have time to implement the alternative development plan. That's tomorrow. That's tomorrow. Dr. Foster leaned forward with obvious concern. What about the people who have already been considering Phoenix Development's offers? Mrs. Henderson, you said they made you an offer for the store. They did. A generous offer. And now, Mrs. Henderson looked around the garage at the faces of people who had been her neighbors, customers, and friends for more than 20 years. Now I'm wondering whether money is really the most important consideration. It's not just about money, Sarah Miller said quietly. It's about what kind of community we want Emma to grow up in. Do I want her to remember Copper Creek as a place where people took care of each other, or as a place where everyone sold out to the highest bidder? Sheriff Bradley had been listening with the careful attention of someone whose job required evaluating both immediate threats and long-term consequences. Sophia, what happens if some people choose your development plan and others choose to sell to Phoenix Development? The revitalization initiative only works if the entire community commits to it. If key property owners sell to Phoenix Development, the integrated tourism and heritage model becomes impossible to implement. So it's all or nothing. It's all or nothing. Ethan found himself staring at the laptop screen, studying the renderings that showed Copper Creek not as it was, but as it could become. The vision was compelling, professionally designed, and obviously expensive. It was also dependent on trusting someone who had spent 2 days lying about who she was, regardless of her reasons for doing so. I need to ask you something, he said to Sophia, and I need you to be completely honest. I'll try. If we agree to this, if we commit to your development plan, what happens to us? Do we become employees of Lane Industries? Do we lose control of our own businesses? Do we become tourist attractions, performing for people who come here to see how authentic small-town folk live? The question struck at the heart of everyone's deepest concern. That salvation might come at the cost of autonomy, that preservation might require surrendering the very independence that made Copper Creek worth preserving in the first place. You remain owners of your own businesses and properties, Sophia said firmly. Lane Industries provides infrastructure, marketing, and operational support, but decision-making authority remains with the community. This isn't about creating a theme park version of small-town life. It's about demonstrating that authentic communities can be economically sustainable without compromising their essential character. And if we want to end the partnership at some point, the development plan includes provisions for community buyout of Lane Industries' investment after 5 years. If the model is successful, if the community is economically stable, you can choose to continue the partnership or assume full control of the enhanced infrastructure. Mrs. Henderson stood up slowly, her movement drawing everyone's attention. I think we need to talk among ourselves before we make any decisions. Sophia, would you mind giving us some privacy? Of course. I'll be at Mrs. Henderson's if you need me. After Sophia left, the garage fell into a silence that was thick with tension and possibility. 6 people who had known each other for years, who had shared celebrations and tragedies, who had watched their community slowly decline despite their best efforts, now faced a decision that would determine whether Copper Creek had any future at all. Well, Sheriff Bradley said finally, I guess we need to figure out whether we trust her. The question isn't whether we trust her, Miguel said quietly. The question is whether we trust ourselves to make this work. What do you mean, Kwang? She's offering us resources and expertise that could transform this community. But resources and expertise don't create success. People do. The question is whether we're prepared to work as hard for our own future as we've been working just to survive. Dr. Foster nodded slowly. Miguel's right. This isn't really about Sophia Lane or Lane Industries. This is about whether we believe Copper Creek is worth fighting for. Of course it's worth fighting for, Sarah Miller said with obvious emotion. But fighting and winning are two different things. What if we commit to this plan and it doesn't work? What if we end up losing everything anyway, but without the financial cushion that Phoenix Development's buyout would provide? What if we don't commit to it and spend the rest of our lives wondering what might have been? Mrs. Henderson countered. Ethan found himself thinking about his father, about the 43 years Big Jim Carter had spent building something meaningful in a place that most people drove past without a second thought. My dad used to say that the biggest risk in life isn't failing at something you believe in. It's succeeding at something that doesn't matter. What does that mean in practical terms? Dr. Foster asked. It means Phoenix Development's offer is safe. We take their money, we start over somewhere else, we probably end up financially better off than we are now. But we also end up as people who gave up on something we claimed to believe in. And Sophia's offer is a chance to prove that communities like this can survive and thrive without sacrificing everything that makes them special. It's risky, it's complicated, and it requires trusting someone we've known for 2 days. But if it works, we become an example of what's possible instead of another cautionary tale about what's inevitable. Miguel finished. Sheriff Bradley leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. There's something else to consider. If Sophia is telling the truth about Phoenix Development being part of a larger strategy to transform rural communities across the Southwest, then what happens here could affect a lot more places than just Copper Creek. You mean we could be setting a precedent? I mean, if we prove that sustainable rural development is possible, other communities facing similar pressures might have alternatives they don't currently know exist. And if we fail, we make it easier for companies like Phoenix Development to convince other communities that resistance is futile, Mrs. Henderson said quietly. The weight of that responsibility settled over the group like a physical presence. They weren't just deciding the fate of Copper Creek, they were potentially influencing the future of rural America. I think, Sarah Miller said slowly, that we need to stop thinking about this as a choice between financial security and community preservation. Maybe the real choice is between accepting inevitability and creating possibility. What do you mean? I mean, Phoenix Development represents the inevitable. Rural communities being consumed by corporate development that values efficiency over everything else. Sophia's plan represents possibility. The possibility that there are other ways to think about economic development, other ways to preserve what matters while still adapting to changing circumstances. Dr. Foster nodded slowly. And possibility is worth fighting for even when the odds are uncertain. Especially when the odds are uncertain, Ethan added. Because certainty is what Phoenix Development is offering, and we all know what their certainty looks like. Miguel stood up and walked to the garage's main entrance, looking out at Main Street, where the few remaining streetlights illuminated empty storefronts and cracked sidewalks. You know what convinced me? What? The way Sophia talked about my father's grave overlooking the north pasture. She understood that some things can't be measured in dollars and cents. Phoenix Development sees my farm as acreage and infrastructure. Sophia sees it as a place where stories live. Stories. The story of my father coming here from Sonora with nothing but determination and a willingness to work. The story of building something meaningful from desert dirt and endless hope. The story of surviving droughts and equipment failures and market crashes, because this land is more than just a business. It's home. Mrs. Henderson wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. That's what we're really choosing between, isn't it? Whether Copper Creek remains a place where stories live, or becomes another place where stories die. Then I guess the question is whether we believe our stories are worth preserving, Sheriff Bradley said, and whether we're willing to trust someone else to help us preserve them, Ethan added. As the evening wore on, the conversation gradually shifted from whether to accept Sophia's proposal to how to make it work. The decision, it seemed, had been made through the kind of collective understanding that comes to communities that have learned to read each other's thoughts and feelings across decades of shared experience. When Sophia returned to the garage an hour later, she found 6 people who looked exhausted but determined, united by a decision that would change their lives in ways they couldn't yet imagine. "We have an answer," Ethan said simply. "And welcome to Copper Creek, partner." The smile that spread across Sophia's face was unlike anything Ethan had seen from her in the past 3 days. Gone was the careful control, the measured responses, the strategic thinking that had characterized every interaction. For a moment, she looked like someone who had just been given the most precious gift imaginable. "Thank you," she said quietly, and her voice carried a weight of emotion that seemed to surprise even her. "You have no idea what this means." "Actually, I think we do," Mrs. Henderson replied, standing to embrace Sophia with the fierce affection she usually reserved for family members. "We're all betting our futures on the belief that some things are more important than quarterly profit reports." What happened next moved with the kind of swift precision that only comes from years of careful planning combined with unlimited resources. Sophia pulled out her phone and made a series of calls that transformed the abstract possibility of the Copper Creek Revitalization Initiative into concrete reality. Within an hour, architects were being dispatched from Phoenix construction crews, were being mobilized from 3 different states, and legal teams were preparing contracts that would make the community partnership official. "The construction supervisor will be here Friday morning," Sophia explained as she coordinated logistics with the kind of efficiency that comes from running multi-billion-dollar operations. "Environmental assessment team arrives Saturday, infrastructure specialists on Monday. We'll have the entire development plan implemented and operational within 18 months, but you'll start seeing changes within weeks." "What about Phoenix Development?" Sheriff Bradley asked. "They're not going to just walk away quietly." "Phoenix Development's option contracts expire at midnight Friday. As long as we can demonstrate that the community has committed to an alternative development plan, their legal standing becomes irrelevant." "Demonstrate how?" "Signed partnership agreements with Lane Industries construction permits filed with the county, initial infrastructure improvements visibly underway. Once we've established that Copper Creek is actively pursuing an alternative development path, Phoenix Development loses any claim to inevitability." Ethan found himself caught between excitement and vertigo. 3 days ago, his biggest concern had been finding $14,000 to prevent foreclosure. Now he was committed to a development plan that would transform his garage into the centerpiece of a heritage tourism complex. And the woman who had made it all possible was coordinating the kind of logistical operation that most small towns couldn't imagine, let alone implement. "Sophia," he said, interrupting her conversation with what appeared to be a team of environmental lawyers. "Can I talk to you privately for a minute?" They stepped outside into the desert night, where the silence was broken only by the distant sound of wind chimes and the rustle of sagebrush in the evening breeze. Above them, the sky was ablaze with stars that were invisible in most of America, hidden by the light pollution of urban development. Having second thoughts, Sophia asked. Having all the thoughts, Ethan replied. This morning I was a small-town mechanic facing bankruptcy. Tonight, I'm apparently a partner in a multi-million-dollar development project. That's a pretty significant adjustment. Adjustments are what make growth possible. And what if I'm not ready for this kind of growth? What if I'm not the person you think I am? Sophia turned to face him directly, and in the starlight, her expression was both gentle and determined. Ethan, you've spent the last 3 years keeping a failing business alive because you believed it was more important to serve your community than to maximize your own profit. You've fixed cars for people who couldn't pay because you understood that their transportation was more important than your cash flow. You've preserved your father's legacy not because it was easy, but because it was right. That doesn't make me qualified to run a heritage tourism center. That makes you exactly the kind of person who should run a heritage tourism center. People don't come to places like this to see perfect business operations. They come to meet authentic people who represent values that the rest of the world has forgotten. And what if I disappoint them? Then you'll handle the disappointment the same way you've handled every other challenge in your life, with integrity, determination, and a commitment to doing right by the people who depend on you. As they talked, the lights in Mrs. Henderson's store across the street went out, followed shortly by the lights in Dr. Foster's clinic and the few other buildings that still showed signs of life after dark. Copper Creek was settling into its usual evening quiet, unaware that everything was about to change. "There's something I need to tell you," Sophia said suddenly. "What? The motorcycle breaking down wasn't an accident." Ethan stared at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean I disabled the fuel injection system before I got to Copper Creek. I needed a reason to stay in town long enough to evaluate the community and the development potential." The revelation hit Ethan like a physical blow. "You've been lying about everything. Not everything. Not about why this matters to me, not about what I think this community could become, not about believing that authentic relationships are more valuable than quarterly profit reports. But you manipulated the whole situation. You created a crisis so you could position yourself as the solution. I created an opportunity to understand what this community was really like before I committed to investing in its future. If I had rolled into town in a corporate limousine and announced that I was a billionaire CEO with a development plan, how would you have reacted?" Ethan considered the question honestly. "We probably would have assumed you were another version of Phoenix Development." "Exactly. You would have been polite, cautious, and completely unwilling to share the kind of honest information I needed to design a development plan that actually serves your community's needs. So you decided to spy on us instead. I decided to get to know you. Real knowledge, not the sanitized version people give to corporate executives they're trying to impress or placate." Ethan found himself torn between anger and understanding. The deception was significant, but the results had been extraordinary. Without Sophia's intervention, Copper Creek would have faced an impossible choice between economic survival and community preservation. Now they had a path forward that offered both. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because partnerships require honesty, even when that honesty is uncomfortable. If we're going to work together to make this project successful, you need to know exactly who you're dealing with." "And who am I dealing with?" "Someone who has the resources to make this project work, the experience to avoid the mistakes that kill most rural development initiatives, and the personal motivation to ensure that Copper Creek doesn't end up like Cedar Falls. Someone who also manipulates situations to get what she wants. Someone who understands that sometimes you have to create opportunities instead of waiting for them to appear naturally." As they stood in the desert darkness, Ethan realized that his anger was being replaced by something more complex, a recognition that Sophia's deception had been motivated by the same commitment to protecting Copper Creek that had driven his own willingness to work for free to extend credit. He couldn't afford to sacrifice his own financial security for the sake of community preservation. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we prove that sustainable rural development is possible. We show that communities like Copper Creek can thrive without sacrificing their essential character. We demonstrate that authenticity and economic viability aren't mutually exclusive. And if we fail, at least we fail fighting for something we believe in instead of surrendering to something we despise." The next morning arrived with the kind of chaotic energy that comes when abstract plans begin transforming into concrete reality. Ethan was at the garage by 6 o'clock, partly out of habit, and partly because sleep had been impossible after the revelations of the previous evening. He was rebuilding Sarah Miller's transmission when the first truck arrived, a massive vehicle carrying surveying equipment and operated by two men who obviously knew exactly what they were doing. "You, Ethan Carter?" the driver asked, consulting a tablet that appeared to contain detailed information about the entire development project. "That's me. Frank Morrison Construction. We're here to conduct the initial site assessment for the Automotive Heritage Center expansion." "Already?" "Ma'am Lane doesn't believe in wasting time. We've got environmental specialists arriving this afternoon, architectural team tomorrow morning, and infrastructure assessment team on Monday. Full construction crew mobilizes next Wednesday." Ethan watched as the surveyors began setting up their equipment with the kind of professional efficiency that suggested this was routine for them, just another development project in a career full of development projects. The difference was that this time the project was designed to preserve rather than replace, to enhance rather than eliminate. "Morning, Ethan," called out Sheriff Bradley as he approached the garage. "Looks like things are moving faster than I expected. How are you feeling about all this?" "Terrified and excited in roughly equal proportions." Sheriff Bradley laughed. "That sounds about right for someone whose life just changed completely overnight." As they talked, Mrs. Henderson appeared from her store, carrying a tray of coffee and what appeared to be enough breakfast pastries to feed a small army. "I thought the workers might be hungry," she explained. But Ethan suspected she was really looking for an excuse to observe the surveying process firsthand. "Mrs. H., how are you doing with all this?" "Oh, I'm fine, dear. A little overwhelmed, perhaps, but fine. I've been thinking about the heritage retail concept Sophia showed us, and I have some ideas about how to blend modern inventory management with traditional customer service." Heritage retail. The idea is to maintain the authentic small-town store experience while offering products that appeal to heritage tourists. Local crafts, regional foods, historical items related to Route 66, and automotive history. People who come for the authentic experience but also want to take something home that reminds them of their visit. Before Ethan could respond, another vehicle pulled into the lot. This time it was Miguel Santos driving his newly repaired truck and looking distinctly nervous. "Ethan, those development people called me again this morning. Phoenix Development. They're offering 20% more than their original price." 20% more. They say they've had some complications with other properties in the area, and they're willing to increase their offer to ensure a quick closing. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. "What did you tell them?" "I told them I needed to think about it." "But Ethan, that's a lot of money. Enough to pay off my equipment loans, upgrade my irrigation system, maybe even buy the Patterson place that's been for sale." "Miguel, you committed to the revitalization project last night." "I know I did. But that was before Phoenix Development increased their offer by $60,000. Mrs. Henderson set down her tray of pastries with obvious concern. Miguel, what's really bothering you about this? Miguel removed his hat and ran his fingers through his graying hair. What if Sophia's project doesn't work? What if heritage tourism and agritourism sound good in theory, but don't generate enough revenue to sustain the farm? At least with Phoenix Development, I know exactly what I'm getting. You know exactly what you're losing too, Sheriff Bradley pointed out. I'm 63 years old, Tom. How many more chances do I get to secure my financial future? The question hung in the air like a physical presence, highlighting the fundamental tension between security and possibility that lay at the heart of every difficult decision. Phoenix Development represented certainty, guaranteed money, immediate resolution, financial security regardless of broader consequences. Sophia's project represented hope, the possibility of something better, but with risks that couldn't be fully calculated or controlled. Before anyone could respond, Sophia herself appeared walking across the lot, with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested she had been monitoring the situation and was prepared to address Miguel's concerns directly. Miguel, she said without preamble, Phoenix Development called you this morning. How did you know that? Because they called everyone this morning. You, Mrs. Henderson, Dr. Foster, Sarah Miller. They're conducting a full-court press to undermine our partnership before it has a chance to succeed. They increased their offer. Of course they did. That's standard strategy when facing unexpected competition. The question is whether you're going to let them manipulate you into abandoning something you believed in 12 hours ago. Miguel's weathered face showed the strain of someone caught between competing pressures. $60,000 isn't manipulation, Sophia. It's life-changing money for someone in my situation. You're right. It is life-changing money. The question is what kind of life change you want. What do you mean? You can take Phoenix Development's money and use it to buy the Patterson place, expand your current operation, continue farming the way you've always farmed. That's a perfectly reasonable choice that would improve your financial situation significantly. But in 5 years, when Phoenix Development has transformed Copper Creek into a truck stop complex and logistics center, when the agricultural character of this area has been replaced by commercial development, when the community that has been your home for 45 years no longer exists, that $60,000 won't seem like such a bargain. Miguel was quiet for a moment, studying the surveying equipment that was already changing the visual landscape of his familiar town. And if your project fails, if the heritage tourism model doesn't work, if the agritourism concept doesn't generate sufficient revenue, then you'll have the satisfaction of knowing you fought for something you believed in instead of surrendering to something you despised. And you'll have the infrastructure improvements and market connections that will make your farm more profitable regardless of the tourism component. Infrastructure improvements, irrigation system upgrades, soil enhancement equipment, modernization, high-speed internet for market research and direct sales. The agricultural component of the heritage tourism model requires your farm to be more productive and profitable, not less. Mrs. Henderson had been listening with growing understanding. Sophia Phoenix Development isn't just trying to buy individual properties anymore. They're trying to prevent our community partnership from succeeding. Exactly. They understand that if Copper Creek proves sustainable, rural development is possible, other communities will start demanding alternatives to corporate development schemes. This isn't just about one truck stop anymore. It's about establishing a precedent that could affect their entire business model. Sheriff Bradley leaned against the fender of Miguel's truck. So we're not just deciding what happens to Copper Creek. We're deciding what's possible for rural communities across the region. That's exactly what we're deciding. As if summoned by the conversation, Richard Morrison's black sedan pulled into the garage lot, followed by 2 additional vehicles that disgorged a team of men in expensive suits who surveyed the surveying equipment with obvious displeasure. "Mr. Carter," Morrison called out, as he approached, his voice carrying the kind of forced friendliness that poorly concealed underlying aggression. "I see you've got some activity here." "Site assessment for the Heritage Center expansion," Ethan replied evenly. "Heritage Center, part of the Copper Creek Revitalization Initiative, community-based sustainable development focused on heritage tourism and agricultural preservation." Morrison's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, revealing a flash of something that might have been alarm before the professional mask reasserted itself. "That sounds like an interesting project, quite ambitious for a community of this size." "Ambitious projects require ambitious partnerships." "Indeed they do. Mr. Carter, I hope you understand that Phoenix Development has significant resources invested in our Copper Creek project. We're not accustomed to encountering complications at this stage of the development process. I'm sure you'll adapt." Morrison turned his attention to Miguel, his smile becoming more pointed. "Mr. Santos, I trust you've had time to consider our revised offer." "I'm still thinking about it." "I hope you'll think quickly. Market conditions can change rapidly, and opportunities have a way of disappearing when they're not promptly embraced." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Phoenix Development was prepared to withdraw their offers entirely if they couldn't prevent the community partnership from moving forward. Miguel would lose not just the enhanced offer, but any offer at all. Sophia stepped forward with the kind of calm authority that comes from years of high-stakes negotiations. "Mr. Morrison, I don't believe we've been formally introduced. Sophia Lane Industries." Morrison's reaction was immediate and profound. The color drained from his face, his confident posture shifted to something more defensive, and his voice took on a tone of wary respect that hadn't been there moments before. "Ms. Lane, we weren't aware that Lane Industries was involved in this project. Lane Industries is the primary partner in the Copper Creek Revitalization Initiative. We're committed to demonstrating that sustainable rural development can be more profitable than extractive development models." "I see. And this is a long-term commitment, 18-month implementation timeline followed by ongoing partnership with the community. Full infrastructure investment, comprehensive marketing support, and guaranteed revenue streams for participating businesses." Morrison glanced at his associates, and Ethan could see them conducting rapid calculations based on information he didn't possess. Whatever they were considering, it was clearly changing their assessment of the situation. "Ms. Lane, perhaps we could arrange a meeting to discuss potential areas of collaboration between Phoenix Development and Lane Industries." "Mr. Morrison, Lane Industries doesn't collaborate with companies that use predatory development practices to exploit distressed communities." Predatory is a strong word. An accurate word. You've systematically targeted every key property owner in Copper Creek with offers designed to prevent community consultation and coordinated response. You've used time pressure and divide and conquer tactics to force individual decisions that serve your corporate interests at the expense of community preservation. We've offered market-rate compensation for properties that would otherwise face foreclosure or abandonment. You've offered short-term financial incentives in exchange for the permanent destruction of community assets that have taken generations to develop. Morrison's professional facade was beginning to crack, revealing the harder edge that lay beneath the surface courtesy. "Ms. Lane, Phoenix Development has significant financial backing and extensive experience in rural development projects. We're prepared to move forward with or without community cooperation." And Lane Industries is prepared to demonstrate that community cooperation creates better outcomes than corporate domination. The question is whether you want to compete with us or disappear quietly before you embarrass yourselves. The silence that followed this exchange was charged with tension and possibility. Morrison was clearly evaluating options he hadn't expected to encounter, while his associates were obviously conducting rapid communication with superiors who would need to reassess the entire Copper Creek project in light of Lane Industries' involvement. "This conversation isn't over," Morrison said finally. "No, it isn't," Sophia agreed. "But it's about to become much more public. Lane Industries will be announcing the Copper Creek Revitalization Initiative at a press conference next week. Regional media business publications and development industry analysts will all be invited to observe sustainable rural development in action." After Phoenix Development's team departed, the garage fell into a silence that was both relieved and apprehensive. The immediate crisis had been addressed, but everyone present understood that the conflict was far from over. "They're going to fight this," Sheriff Bradley observed. "Of course they are," Sophia replied. "But now they're fighting Lane Industries instead of individual property owners. That changes the dynamics considerably." Miguel removed his hat again, but this time his expression showed relief rather than anxiety. "Sophia, when you put it like that, when you explained about infrastructure improvements and market connections, it made me realize that I wasn't really choosing between your project and Phoenix Development's money. I was choosing between fighting for my farm's future and giving up on it entirely." "What did you decide?" "I decided that 45 years of building something meaningful is worth more than $60,000 of walking away money." Mrs. Henderson beamed at Miguel with obvious pride. "That's the spirit that built this community in the first place. And it's the spirit that's going to save it," Ethan added. As the morning progressed, the transformation of Copper Creek from abstract possibility to concrete reality became increasingly visible. Surveying crews marked locations for infrastructure improvements. Environmental specialists conducted soil and water assessments, and architectural teams began detailed measurements of existing buildings. The pace was extraordinary, driven by resources and expertise that most small communities couldn't access and wouldn't know how to coordinate. "Sophia," Dr. Foster said as she arrived at the garage during her lunch break, "I got a call from Phoenix Development this morning. Increased offer, doubled offer. They want to buy my clinic building my house and the vacant lot behind the clinic where I was planning to expand patient parking. And I told them that some things aren't for sale at any price, that I became a doctor to serve communities, not to abandon them when serving becomes challenging." What was their response? They said I was making a mistake that I'd regret when the rural healthcare market collapses entirely. They said small-town medical practices are obsolete, and I should take their money while I still could. Sophia's expression hardened. They're trying to create panic, making everyone feel like they're choosing between our project and their last chance for financial security. Are they right? Is rural healthcare really obsolete? Rural healthcare is obsolete only if we accept that rural communities are obsolete. The telemedicine and wellness tourism components of our development plan are specifically designed to make small-town medical practices more viable, not less. How? By expanding your patient base beyond the immediate geographic area, by providing technology that allows you to offer specialized services through remote consultation, by creating revenue streams that don't depend entirely on local residents who may struggle to pay for healthcare. Dr. Foster nodded slowly. You're talking about making rural healthcare financially sustainable by connecting it to broader markets. I'm talking about using technology and strategic partnerships to preserve what's valuable about small-town medical practice while addressing the economic challenges that threaten its survival. As the afternoon wore on, it became clear that Phoenix Development's morning offensive had failed to break the community partnership. If anything, the increased pressure had strengthened the resolve of Copper Creek's residents, who were beginning to understand that they were part of something larger than a simple development project. "Ethan," Sarah Miller said, as she arrived to pick up her newly repaired car, "I want you to know that I'm all in on this project. Whatever Phoenix Development offers, whatever pressure they apply, I'm committed to proving that single mothers can raise children in communities that value cooperation over competition." "What did they offer you?" "Enough money to relocate to Phoenix or Flagstaff, start fresh in a bigger city, with more opportunities for Emma." They painted a picture of urban amenities, better schools, more cultural activities. Tempting. Terrifying. I don't want Emma to grow up in a place where people are just economic units, where neighbors don't know each other's names, where community means subdivisions instead of relationships. "So you're staying." "I'm staying and fighting. For Emma's future, for our community's future, for the idea that small towns can be more than just stops along the highway." As evening approached, Sophia gathered the core community partners in the garage for a debriefing session that doubled as a planning meeting for the next phase of the development process. "Today was a test," she began. "Phoenix Development wanted to see whether our partnership would hold together under pressure. They wanted to determine whether community solidarity was real or just sentiment that would dissolve when confronted with serious money." "And what did they learn?" Mrs. Henderson asked. "They learned that Copper Creek has something they don't understand and can't replicate: authentic relationships based on mutual support and shared values. They can offer money, but they can't offer meaning." What happens next? Next, we move from defense to offense. We stop reacting to their pressure and start implementing our own vision. Construction begins Monday, marketing campaign launches Wednesday, and by the end of next week, Copper Creek will be demonstrating what sustainable rural development actually looks like. Miguel leaned forward with obvious interest. "What kind of marketing campaign?" "Social media documentation of the development process, regional press coverage of the Heritage Tourism Initiative Partnership. Announcements with organizations that serve the kind of customers who value authentic experiences. We're going to make Copper Creek famous for choosing community over corporations." Famous. "Miguel, by the time we're finished, Copper Creek is going to be a case study in sustainable development programs across the country. Tourism boards, rural development agencies, and community organizers are going to be studying what we accomplish here." Sheriff Bradley looked around the garage that had served as the epicenter for the most important decision in Copper Creek's history. 6 months ago, this town was dying quietly. Now we're about to become a national example of rural revitalization. That's quite a transformation. "The transformation was always possible," Sophia replied. "The community assets were already here. The authentic relationships, the traditional skills, the commitment to taking care of each other. All we did was create a framework for leveraging those assets into economic sustainability." "All you did," Ethan said with a slight smile, "was prove that sometimes salvation comes from unexpected directions delivered by people who understand that wealth means more than money." As the meeting concluded and community members dispersed to their homes and businesses, Ethan found himself alone with Sophia in the garage that would soon be transformed into something he could barely imagine. The surveying equipment had been removed, leaving behind stakes and markings that indicated where the expansion would occur, but the essential character of the space remained unchanged. "Sophia," he said, as they prepared to lock up for the evening, "there's something I need to ask you." "What?" "When this is all over, when the development is complete and the Heritage Center is operational, and Copper Creek has become the model for sustainable rural development, what happens to us?" "What do you mean?" "I mean the relationship between us. The partnership that started with a broken motorcycle and became something neither of us expected. Sophia was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried a vulnerability that had been hidden beneath layers of corporate authority and strategic thinking. I don't know. I've been so focused on proving that this model could work, on demonstrating that communities like Copper Creek could be preserved, that I haven't thought much about what comes after the demonstration. Maybe it's time to start thinking about that. Maybe it is. As they walked across the street toward Mrs. Henderson's store, where Sophia would spend another night in the back room that had become her temporary home, Ethan realized that the Copper Creek Revitalization Initiative had become something more than a development project. It had become a laboratory for discovering whether authentic relationships could survive in a world increasingly dominated by corporate algorithms and profit maximization. Tomorrow would bring construction crews, architectural teams, and the beginning of the physical transformation that would turn Copper Creek from a dying desert town into a thriving heritage tourism destination. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of Main Street, two people who had found each other through a combination of deception and honesty, manipulation and authenticity, corporate power and small-town values, were beginning to understand that the most important development project was the one taking place between them. The stars above Copper Creek shone with the same brilliance they had displayed for generations, witness to countless stories of hope and struggle, success and failure, love and loss. Tomorrow would add another chapter to that cosmic narrative, but tonight belonged to possibility, to the fragile beginning of something that might prove more valuable than all the development projects and profit margins in the world. The morning of Monday, September 15th, dawned with the kind of crisp clarity that made promises seem possible and dreams feel tangible. By 6:30, Main Street looked like a construction zone orchestrated by someone who actually cared about the end result. 3 massive trucks had arrived before sunrise, carrying equipment that gleamed with the kind of serious functionality that spoke of unlimited budgets and professional competence. Ethan stood in the doorway of his garage, coffee mug in hand, watching a crew of 12 workers unload surveying equipment, concrete forms, and what appeared to be enough building materials to construct a small subdivision. The crew chief, a weathered man in his 50s who introduced himself as Bill Hernandez, approached with the confident stride of someone who had overseen hundreds of construction projects and understood exactly how to turn architectural dreams into functional reality. "Mr. Carter, I'm here to build your automotive heritage center. Ms. Lane says you want something that preserves the essential character of this place while making it capable of serving a much broader purpose." "That's exactly what I want," Ethan replied, though he still felt a certain unreality about the entire situation. "How long do you think it will take?" "Foundation work starts today, structural modifications complete by Friday, finished construction within 6 weeks. Ms. Lane doesn't believe in extended timelines when communities are depending on rapid transformation." As Hernandez began coordinating his crew's activities, Ethan noticed that every aspect of the construction process had been designed with community preservation in mind. The workers were careful to minimize disruption to his ongoing automotive repair business. The construction materials had been selected to complement, rather than contrast with existing architecture, and the expansion plans preserved every element of the original garage that held historical or sentimental value. "Ethan, Mrs. Henderson called from across the street, her voice carrying the kind of excitement usually reserved for major holidays or unexpected good news. "Come see what they're doing to the store." Ethan crossed Main Street to find Mrs. Henderson's general store in the early stages of what appeared to be a complete but respectful renovation. The original facade was being preserved and restored, but the interior was being reconfigured to accommodate both traditional general store functions and the heritage retail concepts that would serve the tourism market. "They're keeping the original shelving," Mrs. Henderson explained with obvious delight, but adding modern inventory management systems and point-of-sale technology. They're preserving the old-fashioned customer service counter where people can sit and talk, but incorporating wireless internet and comfortable seating for visitors who want to spend time here. And you're comfortable with all these changes? Comfortable. Ethan, I'm thrilled. For 23 years, I've been watching this store slowly lose customers to big box retailers and online shopping. Now I'm going to be part of a tourism destination that celebrates exactly the kind of personal service and community connection that chain stores can't provide. As they talked, Miguel Santos approached from the direction of his farm, his usual work clothes replaced by what appeared to be his best shirt and newest jeans. His weathered face showed a mixture of excitement and nervous energy that suggested something significant was happening. Ethan, Mrs. Henderson, you need to come see what they're doing at the farm. They followed Miguel to his pickup truck, which had been transformed into an impromptu tour vehicle with additional seating that allowed him to transport visitors around his agricultural operation. The drive to Miguel's farm took only 10 minutes, but it revealed a landscape that was already being transformed by the kind of infrastructure improvements that most rural operations could never afford. New irrigation system arrived this morning, Miguel explained as they toured fields that were being prepared for the agritourism program. Drip irrigation technology that reduces water consumption by 40% while increasing crop yields, plus soil enhancement and organic certification support that will allow me to charge premium prices for produce that meets heritage tourism standards. Heritage tourism standards. Sustainable farming practices, traditional varieties, educational component that teaches visitors about agricultural history and modern, sustainable techniques. People want to understand where their food comes from, how it's grown, why traditional farming methods matter. The farm-to-table restaurant construction site was located on a slight rise that overlooked both Miguel's fields and the distant silhouette of Copper Creek. The building design was elegant but unpretentious, incorporating materials and architectural elements that reflected regional traditions while providing modern functionality for commercial food service. The restaurant opens in 8 weeks, Miguel continued. Chef arrives next month to begin menu development based on crops I'm growing specifically for the restaurant. Everything served will be grown within 50 miles of where people are eating it. As they returned to town, Ethan found himself marveling at the pace and scope of the transformation. In less than a week, Sophia had orchestrated changes that were reshaping not just the physical landscape of Copper Creek, but the economic possibilities for everyone who lived there. Miguel, he said as they parked near the garage, how are you feeling about all this? Terrified and excited, Miguel replied with a laugh, but mostly grateful. Grateful that someone believed this place was worth saving. Grateful that my farm has a future that doesn't involve selling to developers. Grateful that my grandchildren might actually have a reason to stay in Copper Creek instead of moving to Phoenix. Your grandchildren. My daughter Maria called this morning. She's been working as an accountant in Tucson for 8 years, but she's interested in moving back to help manage the agricultural tourism program. Says she wants her kids to grow up in a place where community actually means something. The news that Copper Creek might actually start attracting young families instead of losing them was perhaps the most encouraging development of all. Rural communities across America were struggling with population decline as young people left for urban opportunities and never returned. The possibility that the heritage tourism model might reverse that trend was worth more than any amount of development revenue. That afternoon brought a visitor that none of them had expected. Dr. Amanda Foster was conducting a routine checkup on elderly Pete Morrison when she noticed a car with California license plates parked outside her clinic. The driver was a woman in her 30s who entered the clinic with the kind of purposeful energy that suggested serious business rather than casual tourism. Dr. Foster, I'm Jessica Chen, medical correspondent for the Los Angeles Times. I'm here to write about the Copper Creek Revitalization Initiative, specifically the rural healthcare component. How did you hear about our project? Lane Industries issued a press release yesterday announcing the heritage tourism development. But what caught my attention was the telemedicine and wellness tourism aspects of the healthcare program. Rural healthcare is a national crisis, and if you've found a sustainable model that preserves community-based medicine while addressing economic viability, that's a story worth telling. Dr. Foster spent the next 2 hours explaining how the wellness tourism component would work, how telemedicine partnerships would expand her ability to serve patients, how the heritage tourism model would create revenue streams that didn't depend entirely on local residents who often struggled to pay for healthcare services. The goal isn't to replace traditional community medicine, Dr. Foster explained as they toured the clinic expansion site. The goal is to enhance it by connecting rural healthcare providers to broader markets and advanced resources. And you think people will really travel to Copper Creek for healthcare services? I think people are hungry for healthcare that treats them as human beings rather than medical units. I think they want doctors who have time to listen, who understand their health history, who can provide personalized attention that's impossible in urban medical systems. How many people would need to participate in the wellness tourism program to make the model financially viable? According to the economic projections, if we serve 50 wellness tourists per month, while maintaining our current local patient base, the clinic becomes not just sustainable, but profitable enough to support additional staff and expanded services. By evening, word had spread throughout Copper Creek that the Los Angeles Times was documenting their revitalization project. The implications were both exciting and intimidating. Regional media attention would accelerate the heritage tourism marketing campaign, but it would also subject their community experiment to public scrutiny and potential criticism. Sophia, Ethan said, as they met at the garage to discuss the media attention, "Are we ready for this kind of visibility?" "We're as ready as we're going to be. The infrastructure improvements are proceeding ahead of schedule. The business enhancement programs are being implemented successfully, and the community partnership is stronger than I expected." But what if the reporter finds problems? What if she writes about the risks instead of the opportunities? Then she writes an honest story about a community that's trying something innovative and challenging. That's exactly the kind of story that attracts the people we want to reach. The people we want to reach. People who value authenticity over efficiency, who want to support communities that preserve traditional values while adapting to modern economic realities. People who understand that places like Copper Creek represent something important that shouldn't be allowed to disappear. As they talked, Sheriff Bradley arrived with news that changed the entire trajectory of the conversation. Phoenix Development just filed a lawsuit challenging our development permits. On what grounds? Sophia asked. They claim that Lane Industries' rapid permit approval process violated county regulations, requiring extended public comment periods for major development projects. And they're asking for an injunction that would halt all construction until the legal issues are resolved. Sophia's expression shifted from surprise to something that looked distinctly like anger. They're trying to delay the project long enough to undermine community confidence and create financial pressure that forces individual property owners to reconsider their partnership commitments. How long could a legal challenge delay things? Months, potentially. Long enough to make it impossible to complete the Heritage Center construction before the winter tourism season. So what do? We prove that Phoenix Development's legal challenge is motivated by anti-competitive behavior rather than legitimate regulatory concerns. How? By demonstrating that our permit approval process followed all applicable regulations, that community input was actively solicited and incorporated, and that Phoenix Development's real motivation is preventing competition rather than ensuring regulatory compliance. The next morning brought a team of lawyers from Phoenix who set up a temporary office in the conference room at Copper Creek's tiny city hall. The legal team was led by a woman named Patricia Williams, whose credentials included successful defense of rural development projects against corporate legal challenges in 4 different states. The key to winning this case, Williams explained to the assembled community partners, is demonstrating that the Copper Creek Revitalization Initiative serves genuine community interests rather than external corporate agenda. How do we do that? Mrs. Henderson asked. By documenting community involvement in the planning process, by showing that local residents have decision-making authority over the development program, and by proving that the economic benefits flow primarily to community members rather than outside investors. But Lane Industries is providing the funding. Lane Industries is providing infrastructure investment and technical expertise. The businesses remain community-owned. The decision-making authority remains with local residents, and the revenue streams benefit community members directly. As the legal team prepared, their defense construction continued at an accelerated pace. Bill Hernandez had brought in additional crews to ensure that visible progress continued, despite the legal challenge creating a situation where Phoenix Development's lawyers were forced to argue that an obviously beneficial community improvement project should be stopped for technical regulatory reasons. The optics are terrible for them, Williams observed, as she watched construction crews installing new electrical infrastructure for the Automotive Heritage Center. They're asking a judge to halt job creation infrastructure improvement and community revitalization for the sake of bureaucratic procedure. By Thursday, the Los Angeles Times reporter had been joined by journalists from Phoenix, Flagstaff, and Albuquerque, all attracted by the story of a small desert community fighting corporate development while implementing an innovative alternative. The media attention was transforming Copper Creek's local development dispute into a regional symbol of the conflict between community preservation and corporate expansion. "This is exactly what we wanted," Sophia told Ethan as they watched a television crew interviewing Miguel about sustainable agriculture practices. Regional media coverage that positions Copper Creek as a model for rural revitalization rather than just another development project. "Are you sure about that? Some of the coverage has been pretty critical." "Critical coverage keeps the story honest and builds credibility with the people we want to attract. Heritage tourists aren't looking for perfect communities. They're looking for authentic communities that are grappling with real challenges in innovative ways." The legal hearing was scheduled for Friday morning at the county courthouse in Flagstaff, 30 miles east of Copper Creek. The entire community caravan made the trip, filling the courthouse parking lot with pickup trucks, farm vehicles, and the various cars that Ethan had been keeping running through mechanical skill and stubborn determination. Judge Margaret Rodriguez had been hearing rural development disputes for 15 years, and her reputation suggested someone who valued substance over procedure, community benefit over corporate convenience. The hearing began with Phoenix Development's lawyers arguing that Lane Industries' rapid permit approval process had violated county regulations requiring extended public comment periods. "Your Honor," the lead Phoenix Development attorney argued, "this development project affects the entire character and economic future of Copper Creek. Such significant changes require extensive community consultation and regulatory review that simply hasn't occurred." Patricia Williams rose to respond with the kind of controlled fury that comes from defending communities against corporate legal manipulation. "Your Honor, Phoenix Development's concern for community consultation is remarkable, considering that their own development plan was formulated without any community input whatsoever. They're asking this court to halt a community-driven revitalization project because it interferes with their plan to transform Copper Creek into a truck stop complex against the expressed wishes of community residents. Can you document community support for the Lane Industries project? We can, Your Honor. Every property owner affected by the development program has signed partnership agreements. Every business owner has committed to participation in the Heritage Tourism Initiative. The project has unanimous community support. And can Phoenix Development document community support for their truck stop proposal? The Phoenix Development attorney's hesitation was answer enough. Your Honor, our project represents sound economic development that would benefit the broader region regardless of whether individual community members initially embrace the opportunity. So you're asking me to halt a development project that has unanimous community support in favor of a development project that has no community support whatsoever. We're asking you to ensure that proper regulatory procedures are followed. Judge Rodriguez studied the legal documents for several minutes before rendering her decision. Phoenix Development's motion for an injunction is denied. The county permit approval process was conducted in full compliance with applicable regulations. Construction may proceed. The celebration that erupted in the courthouse parking lot was spontaneous and heartfelt, the kind of community expression that happens when people who have been fighting for something important finally receive validation that their fight was worthwhile. We did it, Mrs. Henderson said, tears streaming down her face as she embraced Sophia with fierce gratitude. We actually did it. You did it, Sophia replied. All I did was provide resources and coordination. The vision, the commitment, the determination to preserve community values while adapting to economic reality. That came from all of you. As the community caravan returned to Copper Creek, the desert landscape looked different somehow, charged with possibility and purpose in ways that made the familiar seem extraordinary. The late afternoon sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, creating a backdrop that seemed designed to celebrate new beginnings and successful conclusions. 6 months later, Copper Creek had become exactly what Sophia had envisioned. A thriving heritage tourism destination that preserved authentic community character while providing sustainable economic opportunities for residents. The Automotive Heritage Center was booked with educational tours and restoration workshops 3 months in advance. Miguel's agritourism program was hosting visitors from across the Southwest who came to learn about sustainable farming while enjoying farm-to-table dining experiences. Dr. Foster's wellness tourism program was serving patients who traveled from urban areas specifically to receive personalized health care in a community setting. But more than that, Copper Creek had become something that couldn't be measured in tourism revenue or development statistics. It had become a place where young people returned to raise families, where elderly residents could age with dignity and community support, where traditional values and modern innovation coexisted in ways that enhanced rather than contradicted each other. Ethan, Sophia said as they stood in the Heritage Center on a Thursday evening in March, watching a group of teenagers from Phoenix learn carburetor rebuilding techniques from a master mechanic who understood that teaching was as important as fixing. Do you remember what you said about your father's definition of success? That a man's worth isn't measured by what he accumulates, but by what he contributes. What do you think he would say about what we've accomplished here? Ethan looked around the Heritage Center that bore his father's name, filled with young people learning traditional skills, supported by a community that had chosen preservation over profit and authenticity over efficiency. I think he'd say that sometimes the most important thing you can contribute is proof that alternatives are possible. And what do you think about what we've accomplished? The question carried weight that extended beyond the development project, beyond the successful transformation of Copper Creek from dying desert town to thriving heritage destination. It was a question about the relationship that had developed between a small-town mechanic and a billionaire CEO who had discovered that wealth meant more than money, that success required more than profit margins, that love could grow in the space between deception and honesty, between manipulation and authenticity. "I think," Ethan said slowly, "that we've proved something that Phoenix Development and companies like them don't understand." "What's that?" "That the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold. They can only be built, preserved, and shared with people who understand their worth." Sophia moved closer to him, her hand finding his in the gesture that had become natural over months of working together to build something that neither of them could have accomplished alone. "And what are the most valuable things?" "Community, authenticity, relationships based on mutual respect and shared purpose, the knowledge that what you're doing matters to people you care about. Anything else? Love." Ethan said, finally speaking the word that had been implicit in every conversation, every shared decision, every moment, when two very different people had chosen to trust each other with something more precious than money or status or corporate success. Love that grows not from convenience or proximity, but from recognition. Recognition that the other person shares your deepest values even when those values require sacrifice. Even when those values require giving up a billionaire lifestyle to live in a desert town with a population of 847. Even when those values require to believing that a small-town mechanic might be worth more than all the corporate executives and board members and strategic partners in the world. As the sun set over Copper Creek, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that seemed designed to celebrate perfect endings and new beginnings, Sophia Lane and Ethan Carter stood in the Automotive Heritage Center that bore his father's name, surrounded by evidence that authentic communities could survive and thrive without sacrificing the values that made them worth preserving. Outside Main Street bustled with the kind of purposeful activity that came from economic vitality rather than mere survival. Heritage tourists explored Mrs. Henderson's store, sampling local crafts and regional foods, while engaging in conversations about community history and traditional values. Agricultural tourists returned from Miguel's farm with vegetables they had helped harvest and stories about sustainable farming practices they planned to implement in their own communities. Wellness tourists emerged from Dr. Foster's clinic with treatment plans that addressed not just medical symptoms but lifestyle factors that contributed to overall health and happiness. But most importantly, the streets carried the sounds of children playing, of young families choosing to build their futures in a place that valued human connection over economic efficiency, of elderly residents aging with dignity in a community that honored their wisdom and supported their needs. "Sophia," Ethan said as they prepared to close the Heritage Center for the evening, "there's something I need to ask you." "What? Will you marry me?" The question was simple, direct, and completely free of the corporate strategy and careful calculation that had characterized so many of their interactions. It was a question from one person to another, based on recognition that they had found something together that neither wealth nor status could purchase. "Yes," Sophia replied without hesitation, "but only if you promise me something." "What?" "Promise me that we'll never let success change what made us successful in the first place. Promise me that 20 years from now, Copper Creek will still be a place where people take care of each other, where authenticity matters more than profit margins, where communities are built on relationship rather than transaction." "I promise," Ethan said, sealing the commitment with a kiss that tasted of desert wind and endless possibility, as they walked hand in hand down Main Street toward Mrs. Henderson's store, where Sophia had maintained her room even after she could have afforded to build a mansion on any hill in America they passed the sign that welcomed visitors to Copper Creek. Population 847 and growing home of the Southwest Automotive Heritage Center, Santos Family Farm-to-Table Restaurant, and the Foster Wellness Clinic. But more than that, home to the proof that communities could be preserved without being pickled, that economic development could enhance rather than eliminate authentic human relationship, that love could grow in the space between two very different worlds, when it was nurtured by people who understood that the most valuable things in life were those that money couldn't buy and corporate development couldn't replicate. The stars above Copper Creek shone with the same brilliance they had displayed for generations, but now they illuminated something new. A community that had chosen possibility over resignation, authenticity over efficiency, love over profit. And in making that choice had discovered that sometimes the most important revitalization project is the one that happens not to buildings or businesses, but to the human heart. In the distance, the lights of Interstate 40 carried travelers toward destinations they considered more important than a small desert town with a funny name and an unlikely story. But in Copper Creek itself, in the quiet streets and restored buildings, and the garage where an honest mechanic had learned that helping a stranger could change the world, the future had arrived. Wearing work clothes and carrying the tools necessary to build something that would last not just for quarterly reports or annual assessments, but for generations of people who understood that the most sustainable development of all is the kind that develops human potential alongside economic opportunity. The story of Copper Creek had become the story of what was possible when people chose community over corporation, when they chose to fight for something they believed in, instead of surrendering to something they despised when they discovered that sometimes salvation arrives not in the form you expect, but in exactly the form you need. And in the Automotive Heritage Center that bore the name of a man who believed that worth was measured by contribution rather than accumulation, the tools lay ready for the next day's work. The work of proving that authentic communities could thrive, that traditional values could coexist with modern innovation, that love could bridge any gap between different worlds when it was built on the foundation of shared purpose and mutual respect. The Copper Creek Revitalization Initiative had succeeded beyond anyone's projections, but its greatest success was not measured in tourism revenue or development statistics. Its greatest success was measured in the faces of children who would grow up believing that community was possible, in the voices of young couples planning futures in a place that valued relationship over transaction, in the quiet satisfaction of people who had fought for something important and discovered that sometimes when you fight for the right reasons with the right people, you actually win.